I skipped over something last night, so I want to make sure I go back and cover it. And actually, it's convenient that I got my PowerPoints up. But last night when we were talking about the different types of agency, we talked about single agency firms, firms that only work with sellers, or firms that only work with buyers. And then we talked about dual agency. We'll get much more into that next week. But with dual agency, it's two clients. So single agency, you're dealing with a client, you're working with the client, and then on the other side is a customer. Dual agency, both are clients. But the other thing we didn't touch on last night that I glossed over that I just want to make sure we cover is a situation, potential situation called a transactional broker or a facilitator broker. And in those situations, there are no clients. Both parties are customers. And in North Carolina, transactional brokerage is not allowed. So if you're involved in a real estate transaction, somebody has to be hired. Does that make sense? Maybe it's not even you. Maybe you're representing the customer, but you can't, like, let's say you have a for sale by owner, and then they find an unrepresented buyer and they call you and say, can you help? Because they know we have the paperwork. They know we have the forms. They know we know the home inspectors and, you know, everybody else involved in the process. So they may call you, and this comes up a lot, you guys, and they may call you and say, hey, we'll give you, you know, X amount if you help us facilitate this transaction. Nobody wants to hire you, but we just want you to help us facilitate the transaction. And this is another one of these things that we need to know the parameters of our jobs. And we need to make sure that we let them know that, again, in North Carolina, one side has to be a client. Maybe it's your client, maybe it's not, but one side. We can't have two customers. Thoughts on that? I had a teammate call me a month and a half ago. That very situation. One of his buddies wanted to buy for sale by owner. He said, can I do that? I said, as long as one of them signs an agency agreement. So it's one of those things that I think comes up. The other thing I wanted to look at, I'm in the digital manual, but for my hard book people, I'm back on page 164 just for a second. I kind of got excited talking about misrepresentation and omission. And again, I just kind of skipped over this, but in 164, and again, what you're looking at the screen here, there's some duties that we owe to parties, whether or not they are a principal, whether or not they're a customer, whether or not they're a client or a customer. And what we talked about last night was our duty to avoid lying or omitting material facts. So that first bullet point is what we talked about. But I do think it's important that we make sure we're clear on the rest of these. Again, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with a client or a customer. We have a duty to avoid making false promises. Anything that's going to encourage somebody or make somebody making a decision about the transaction. If you guys make promises to somebody, keep it. There's our duty to avoid any undisclosed conflict of interest. I think probably the biggest undisclosed conflict of interest is undisclosed dual agency. So make sure if you enter into dual agency, you're doing it with intentionally, with informed written consent. Duty to properly account for funds for others. We know OCAR, our A in OCAR is accounting. But at any point, if we have somebody else's money in our hand, maybe they be a client or a customer, for example, then we're responsible for that money. So accounting for funds, handling other people's monies, acting competently, avoiding improper conduct, be honest. Boy, they take the fun out of it, don't they? Deliver all offers and contracts, disclose commissions, referral fees, kickbacks, etc., as long as they're allowable by RESPA, of course. you guys get more into RESPA and 302. I think that's all we say about RESPA and 301. So we'll let you guys cover that. But I just wanted to make sure that we saw the rest of our duties. Like I said, I got off on misrepresentation, omission, and never came back to this. So I just want to make sure that we saw these and we went through them and we were good with these. So any questions or comments, anything we talked about last night? So where we are, we're in the throes of our agency disclosure discussion. So we're going to finish that up. We're going to look at the disclosure, spend some time going through those forms. And where we left last night, the commission has offered us some disclosure steps. So we're going to provide the working with real estate agent disclosure. Commission rule says no later than or at the time of first substantial contact. So there's the trick to constantly be on alert for that first substantial contact. When we look at the form in just a second, we're going to see that the disclosure gives us the opportunity to discuss the agency relationships that my firm offers. When we look at this working with real estate agent disclosure, we're going to kind of see this as a menu. So when you walk into a restaurant and they hand you a menu, what do they have available? And then at that time, once we go over our agency relationships and our agency options, at that time, we need to determine what capacity we're going to work, because I need to know how to proceed. I need to know if I'm going to proceed with you as my client or with you as my customer. Back to our plane. Am I going to put you in first class or am I going to put you in coach? So we need to decide our relationship, the capacity that we're going to work very early on in the relationship. And the commission suggests that we do that at the time that we're doing our agency disclosure. Obviously, this isn't a fine science. You know, you may have somebody come to your open house today and say something that triggers the need for the disclosure and then leave. And then you may not hear again from them, right, for a couple of days. Or maybe they're not interested in that house, but they want you to help them find another house. So again, you guys, these things that we're talking about, it's not a fine science. Just trying to give you guys, everybody, an idea of what a good order, what a good place for that to be would be. We talked about this first substantial contact, and I wanted to share with you guys, probably, I don't know, it's been a while, 8-10 years ago, one of our commissioners, a daggone commissioner, was genuinely interested in buying a house. So he and his wife went open housing. And they went to one of the open houses and they struck up a conversation with the agent. And they reached the point in time where the commissioner felt that they had hit first substantial contact. And the commissioner asked the agent, is there anything you need to go over with me? And the agent said, nope. He said, nothing you need to disclose? He said, like nothing we need to. No, we're all. He gave her 3 opportunities to do that disclosure. And the third time, he finally said, do you know who I am? And he told her, and I'm sure she had some thoughts flowing through her mind at that time. I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't understand what that was, Julie.
But you guys can hear me now? Okay. Like I said, I don't pretend like I understand Zoom. So pay attention to people. If you have a commissioner come into your open house and they start asking questions like nothing you need to disclose to me, you know, pay attention to what the people were saying. The guy tried. I don't know whatever happened from there. But I wonder if they send secret shoppers out. I wonder if they would do that. You never know, I guess. I guess treat everybody that comes in your open house as if it was a secret shopper from the from the real estate commission. So let's see. Let's see. First substantial contact. We talked about this last night. If first substantial contact happens in person, then we need to review that disclosure immediately. If it's by phone or electronic means, we still need to discuss it. We still need to go over it. But we have up to 3 days to get it in their hands. So if you're talking to them on the phone for the first time or an email, you have their email. And you know, you can explain it. Again, you guys, handing it to them is not enough. We need to review and hand it to them. Make sure we go over those options. So when you're working with a prospective seller, we're just going to focus on sellers right now. Typically, first substantial contact is going to happen when you're scheduling the listing appointment or when you're at the listing appointment. Again, it's never too early to do it. You just kind of need to figure out. But when the seller calls you and says, hey, we want to sell our house, can you come over tomorrow and meet with us? I don't know anything about them at this point. You may want to do it. Now, if we hit first substantial contact over the phone when we're scheduling that appointment, then we need to stop and do it. But assuming it hasn't happened on that phone call, when you go to that listing appointment, we're going to want to do it very early, because when we're at that listing appointment, isn't something bound to come out? Isn't the seller bound to tell us something that, again, it's the idea of them understanding that we don't know them confidentiality. It's been my experience, you guys, that sellers are proud. I mean, this is their home. You know, blood, sweat, and tears went in this. Everybody else in the world, this is just a house. But to the seller, this is their home. And you walk in their front door and they're proud and they want to give you the grand tour. And I think we need to be in control of that. I think we need to, I can't wait to see your home. How about we sit down and have a chat for just a second? Because the last thing we want is a seller going through the home and the grand tour and saying, this is broke, that doesn't work, this isn't working right. And then us say, oh, I have to disclose that. So kind of controlling that, having control over that, and doing that before we start gathering a lot of information or the seller starts volunteering a lot of information. And again, the big thing here, they don't, or I don't owe them confidentiality until and if they decide to hire me. You guys, competitive listing appointments are a very real thing. And you may or may not know that you're on a competitive listing appointment. Maybe the sellers told you, maybe they haven't. So you want to make sure that you let them know, don't you tell me anything confidential until and if you decide to hire me. Because if they have the audacity to go with another agent, and then you later bring the buyer to the transaction, your loyalties to that buyer, right? And isn't the seller going to be upset because you're what they think blabbing all their secrets, but you never told them not to blab? So make sure we cover that before we start getting into a lot of details. When we're working with buyers, again, doing that disclosure before that first substantial contact, usually before we start asking the buyer a lot of information, or again, the buyer starts volunteering. And particularly with buyers, the real estate commission says at this point, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. You know, basically for the sellers, they only have two choices, don't they? They're either going to hire us or they're not. Buyers have more choices. They're either going to hire us, they're going to let us be a seller sub-agent, maybe they're not going to hire us. So buyers, we just need to know early. Once we've been hired, if I'm already acting as a seller's agent, I have this duty to disclose in writing to prospective buyers my agency status no later than first substantial contact. So everybody understand, I've already been hired. I'm a listing agent. I'm doing the open house. This first one is the scenario that we've been going through last night and today. The second bullet point we want to spend a little bit of time on, making sure we're good here. if you've been or when you've been hired as a buyer's agent, once you've been hired as a buyer's agent, we have a duty to disclose our agency status at initial contact. So let's make sure we're good with the difference of first substantial contact and initial contact. We said last night, first substantial contact was the moment in time when the conversation switched gears from the property to the people. Initial contact is, hi, my name is Julie Campbell, and I have a buyer. I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your listing or your home. So when you're acting as a buyer's agent, we've got to disclose the fact that we've been hired as a buyer's agent at initial contact. Most of the time, this is going to happen when we're scheduling the showing. So you guys will learn, if you haven't already been into showing time, we have that centralized showing system that allows us to go in and schedule all our showings at once. And when you go into showing time, you have to select your role. Are you scheduling this showing as a buyer's agent or a seller sub-agent? And when the showing request goes out to the seller and the listing agent, they get an email that says, basically, Julie Campbell, comma, buyer's agent, comma, wants to show your home tomorrow at whatever time. So usually that first or that initial contact will happen when you're scheduling, and showing time handles this for us. But what about a scenario where you have a buyer interested in a listing and they want to go see it tomorrow, but before they go out, they have some questions and they ask you to contact the listing agent? You say, of course. So now your initial contact is not when you're scheduling the showing, but when you're calling on behalf of your buyers. And again, all we need to do is, my name is Julie Campbell. I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your listing, and they have a couple questions for you. Do we see the difference? Do we hear the difference in the first substantial contact and the initial contact? Questions on this? So our disclosure and our consent to dual agency, again, our working with real estate agent disclosure gives us the opportunity to review that, to go over that. We have no idea at this point, for most part, we have no idea at this point if we're going to be in a dual agency situation. With sellers, we need to have this conversation up front because we need to know before we advertise the listing, before we put it out there, whether or not they're going to allow dual agency. For buyers, we want to address it in the early on, but we probably don't need to have the big conversation until they're ready to see one of our listings. So when that opportunity comes up, we may, and again, we talk about it, but we need to make sure they understand before that showing happens. Oral buyers, of course, we can get their oral consent to do dual agency to allow the showing. But what we're saying here is we got to get authorization. We got to get permission from both sides. And if either side says no to dual, then you can't show or you can't allow that showing. And that's what we need to make sure that people understand. When the seller says no to dual, that's fine. That's your right. That's your choice. But what you need to understand, if you say no to dual, no agent in my firm can show your home. If I was 5 agents in my firm, whoop-de-doo, right? But what if I had 500 agents in my firm? That could be a different story for the seller now, right? They're limiting that pool of buyers. Same thing with buyers. If they say no to dual, that's fine, guys. That's their choice. That's their right. But if they say no to dual, they need to understand what they're saying is they're not going to see anything that my firm has listed. Remember, dual agency is not about me, the individual agent. Dual agency is about the firm. So what we're going to do now we're going to look at our working with real estate agent disclosure. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but I never think it hurts to go through it. Again, you know, common thing I hear from new agents is, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Well, the commission provides us with so much literature, so much information. And I'm a big believer that if you're familiar with the forms, then that'll help put words in your mouth. Y'all don't stand there and read to them. Nobody likes that. But you familiar with the forms, you go over and over and over again, and you're familiar with them, and you know, help you know what to say. So when we look at working with real estate agent disclosure, this is particularly for sellers. It tells us this form is required in all sales transactions. That does include residential and commercial. So working with real estate agent is not required for lease transactions. Thus, it's not required for all transactions, sales only, and commercial sales is sales.
May, real quick.
Yeah.
As far as the WWREA, I was trying to get into another, let's say, firm in Lillington, and asked the young lady where I could get a bunch of those so I can bring them with me, you know, have them in the trunk of my car. And she says, "Oh, we don't usually use those." I said, "Okay, see ya, bye."
Wow. You know what, Michael? It surprises me how many agents across the state, and I think it's one of these things, like obviously the commission, 109,000 licensees in the state of North Carolina right now. So the commission can't go check all of us, right? Michael, are you doing your disclosure? Fred, are you? But here's the thing. I think it's one of those things that it's not a problem until it's a problem, and then it becomes a problem. If the commission ever wants to investigate you or your firm, they're kind of like the IRS, right? Once they come in to investigate, they're going to say, show us all of your working with real estate agent disclosures from 2022. And if you have the exact same number of disclosures as you had transactions last year, there's going to be a flag that goes up, isn't there? Because as good as we'd like to think that we are, if we're doing this right, we're going to have a lot more disclosures than we have transactions. Because unfortunately, not all these disclosures turn into client-customer relationships. You guys with me? So if you had 20 disclosures and 20 closings last year, that may be a little flag for them. So Michael, I know it's tough. And, you know, agents in my firm they struggle with it. I mean, we bring it up in sales meeting. It's probably about at least a yearly sales meeting on the importance of this, going over this. You know, sometimes we role play. I think what it comes down to with a lot of agents is just uncomfortable. And it's really easy for us not to do things that make us uncomfortable, right? So I think that can be part of it. But I promise you guys, once you get through it a few times, have you guys got to do this one yet for Ryan has? Anybody else got to do one for a consumer yet? Ryan, how'd it go when you did it? Was it smooth?
It was fine. I asked my coach what to say, and his advice was just tell him to sign it so you don't go to real estate jail. That's exactly how he told me to present it. But I don't I don't present it that way. I just explain to them that these are the different situations that we can come into. And if I don't want to put words from my mouth, I'll send them a video from the commission's website. That way they can just watch the video. And if they have questions, they can hit me up there. Michael, did you ever get that form?
Oh, I've got them now downloaded either on my laptop,
Okay.
my cell phone. So I mean, I have access to them, and I can email them at the snap of a finger. But when it was told to me that we don't use them, I'm like, no, big red flag. See you later.
Yeah. I was gonna say I'll send them over to you if you didn't have them, but if you got them, great.
Thank you, Ryan.
I appreciate it, Ryan. I actually have a 1 terabyte external USB drive that's sitting here loaded up with all these forms ready to go.
So when we look at this, what's the very first thing this says, you guys? Let's put these consumers' mind at ease. This isn't a contract. I'm not trying to enter into a relationship with you. The only thing you're doing when you sign it is saying that you received it. I think this is what makes the public nervous. real estate agents may not always have the best reputation. I've heard some times we're down there with like shady used car salesmen, right? I mean, you know, so when the public meets us, they're on guard. They are on guard. And when we throw them a form out the gate and say, start babbling on something about agency, their guard's up, they're hesitant. So I think saying this first, this is in no way a contract. We're not entering into any kind of relationship. The only thing you're doing is saying is that you have received it when you sign it. If they refuse to sign, can I make anybody do anything? I'm still trying to figure out how, right? So if they refuse to sign, hey, I get it. You know, at that point, all we can do is write, refuse to sign, you know, Bob refused to sign on March 8th, you know, as much information as you can get in there, showing that you tried. And again, here we go again with the commission banging down our doors and going through our files. If all of your disclosures say refuse to sign, refuse to sign, refuse to sign, they're probably going to have a little red flag go up. So I'm not saying you're not going to have one or two. I mean, I had a lady once, she wanted to see my listing. It was my listing. And I met her at the house and I needed to let her know that I represented the seller, right? I'm going to show her the house because that's what's in the best interest for my seller to try to sell it. And we were in the driveway and I did my disclosure and she said, I just met you. I'm not signing anything you gave me. Fair enough. It's not that she didn't hear what I said. She just didn't want to sign. I get it. So making sure they understand that out the gate, I do think that's important. In a real estate sales transaction, it's important that you understand whether an agent represents you. Maybe this is me, maybe this is somebody else. I don't know who's represented or who might represent you, but I'm kind of speaking on behalf of all 109,000 of us across the state, aren't we? Because you need to know if you're represented at all. So you need to understand whether any agent, an agent represents you in the transaction. Real estate agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact. We go on to say before asking for or receiving your confidential information. And they need to give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This is your own protection. To me, this third bullet point is what this is all about. Do not share any confidential information with an agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others. Well, there it is. They spell that out for them pretty nicely, don't they? Is there anything left to wonder here? Do I owe you confidentiality? Evidently not. So again, they kind of help us put words in our mouth. Then we have a note to the agent, check all relationship types below that may apply to this seller. And I'm just going to minimize this for a second so we can see it all. But this is our menu. This is what we have to offer. So when we're talking to a consumer that may be a seller, you know, maybe my firm will act as a seller's agent, maybe we'll act as a dual agent, but you know what? My firm doesn't offer designated dual agency. So that's not a menu option that we're going to check. I just put the X there for emphasis. That's not a menu option that we're going to check. Same thing with working with the FSBO. Some firms may not want to work with the FSBO. But again, you guys, this comes down to your firm's policy. If your firm offers it all, check it all. If your firm doesn't, then you need to be careful that you only check what they offer. What questions do I have about the menu? We got this form a couple years ago. They redid the whole disclosure. The previous disclosure was horrible. It was awful. You guys are so fortunate. I think it was July of 21 or 22, something like that. You probably heard a woohoo from across the state of North Carolina. That was all 109,000 of us going, oh, thank God you gave us this. But there was some confusion when the form first came out about what we check. So the commission readdressed it across the state, which I appreciate. Everybody came together and took the time. They heard us and they knew that we needed some clarification. So that's when they came back and said, treat it like a menu. Let's see, I got Ryan and then Michael, I think I saw you too. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask Julie, so when I'm on the phone with someone and then they start babbling on about their house, and then I stop them and give them the disclosure that I'm an agent. And then after we get off the call, I typically, if I have their email, I'll tend to send the form over by email just right away. But I don't ordinarily push them to sign it until we go to consultation. Is that a good practice, or should I push that a little harder? Like, is that going to cover me just sending the form out?
So you have the documentation that you sent it. You know what I'm saying? So they say as long as you review it, because like you say, you may not be able to get it in their hand right away. But that's where the review and, have them sign comes into play. So I think as long as you're still having the conversation, then yeah, I mean, you send it to them. I keep that sent email, because what do we document? Everything. So I would keep that that signed email, or that sent, there it is, that sent email. So they have that. But then, yeah, when you meet them, because it's easier when you're face to face, right? Because now you're sitting in their living room and you're like, as we discussed, and just so you guys understand, and and now you hand it to them. So document. Good question, Ryan. Thank you. Michael, did I see a hand or?
No, I was just reiterating July 21st. That's all. Or 21 rather. You're trying to figure out what year it
Okay,
was.
yeah, July 21. Yeah, like I said, a resounding woohoo, and you guys are probably like, what is that? That was every single agent in the state of North Carolina rejoicing this new this new form. The previous disclosure was horrible. So you guys be glad this is what you know. You're just going to have to trust me on that. You guys be glad this is what you know.
The only thing I'm curious about is, why is there two forms technically, one for seller, one for buyer? Why couldn't they just condense it all into one form?
It's supposed to be a one-page, two-sided. So that's how it was designed. But in the e-world that we live in, it shakes out to 2 pages. You know what I'm saying? So my firm, what we've done, Michael, and I don't know what others do, but we've done, because we have templates. So when my agents create a loop, there's a lot of these forms are already added. So we just put the seller in the seller's template, the buyer in the buyer's template, and then that way they don't get, they don't get mixed. But I think almost 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, that's the way it was. The vision was it was going to be a two-sided piece of paper. But I bet you we send this electronically a lot more than what we ask people to wet sign it, truthfully. For you guys, again, here's some verbiage on seller's agency. I'll let you guys read this. Here's some verbiage on dual agency, designated dual agency. Obviously, this is not enough to justify having the discussion with the sellers about what dual agency is, but it's a good place to get you guys started. Whether or not the seller is going to be a FSBO or not. And then it says, note to seller, for more information on agents' duties and services, refer to the commission's Q&A. We'll see that in a second. Or ask, here's an agent again. It doesn't say you. It doesn't say, the person you're talking to right now. It says any agent, an agent. So we're not committing anybody to anything, right? We're just saying, look, anybody that has a license, you need to discuss this with. Then we have a place for the sellers. I got 2 sellers assigned. You guys are also going to jot down your name, license number, and your firm name. The second page, and it's set up this way too. So here's the second side. This is for our, there it is. This is for our buyers. Again, very similar verbiage, just time buyers. This is all, the important is all the same. Our menu items, menu options have changed just a little bit. So instead of offering seller agency, if your firm offers buyer agency, again, if you're a single agent firm and you only work with sellers, don't you need to disclose to the consumer that you don't offer buyer agency? You guys see what I'm saying? So if you're a single firm, single agent firm, you can only discuss the options that you offer. Dual and designated again. And then for buyers, more so, will your firm work with an unrepresented buyer with you being the seller sub-agent? The agent who gave you this form may assist you in your purchase, but will not be representing you and has no loyalty to you. The agent will represent the seller. Do not share any confidential information with this agent. So I think it does a good job of just letting, I mean, how many times do we see the word confidential and no confidentiality just in having this discussion with buyers or sellers? So this is our one-page, two-sided disclosure. Questions or comments on this? I know you guys have been through it before, but doesn't hurt to do it again. The other thing I want to look at, I thought was in here, but don't worry, I got a solution. I want to anyway show you guys a few things on ncrec.gov. So this will be nothing I'll be able to show you. You guys, this is a great resource for information, not only for the public. I mean, that's why this was set up, was to help educate the public. But you and I can use a lot of these resources and tools as well when we're communicating with the public. And I'd like you guys to spend some time in here as you're getting into your career, especially the various tabs, so you're familiar with what they have to offer. And one of the places I find myself going on a regular basis is the publications tab. And if we repeat ourselves, so when you say publications, everybody see what I'm saying? I'm not repeating myself, but publications. And then you come down, there's, you know, just some good stuff in here, but probably one of my favorite things that the commission offers to educate the public are these Q&A brochures. So again, when you're meeting with people, when you're trying to have these conversations, here's the literature right here, and it allows you to put something in your hand. Now you can order a nice, I used to have some, but you can order a nice glossy brochure that kind of opens up, and I don't remember how much it is. If you're frugal like me, you can do the flat PDF download, hand them a piece of paper, send it to them in an email. Doesn't matter how we get them the information. Due diligence for residential buyers. This is something that I'm sure was really popular a couple years ago when buyers are putting down $50,000 in due diligence, for example, making sure they understood that risk, having that conversation. I think putting that in their hand, earnest money. Here's your closings. We're going to talk about fair housing, home inspections. So just various things that you guys, as you come across, as you encounter, they got the literature, they got the information here. The well water was the most recent one, probably last year or so. But the one I want to look at right now with you guys is the working with real estate agents. And again, this isn't the pretty glossy one. This is just the flat PDF, but it's free. So, you know, to me, this is the good one. The information is the same. It's just whether or not it looks pretty or not. But this goes through, this allows us to have the conversation with the consumer when we're doing our disclosure and asking them to sign. What do we see there in bold? First thing, don't share confidential information with me. I mean, how many times are we telling them over and over and over again? So do we see the importance? I mean, guys, that's the big thing about doing your disclosure, is making sure that they understand that I don't owe them that confidentiality. Here's our fair housing, racial equality, fair housing. We're going to talk more about that in this class. We go on to define what the word agency means. What is an agency agreement? Letting the consumer know that agency agreements are employment contracts. This is how you hire me to do the job. Is there a standard length of time? Nope, it should all be negotiable. It might start with your firm's policy and then be negotiable between the seller. I think the different markets might depend too on how long you have that listing agreement or that buyer's agency agreement. The last couple years, we haven't needed a listing agreement for 6 months. We only needed it for, 2 months. We're getting back into a market where we may need longer listing agreements, because homes are going to be on the market a little bit longer. Have you guys heard in all of your teaching and coaching and training yet? Have you guys heard of something called absorption rate pricing? Absorption rate. A couple of you have, a couple of you haven't. So you're getting there. But just kind of the big picture of absorption rate pricing, it allows you to see how many days, the average days on market for the homes in that area. So it's kind of parallel to your CMA, but it says, homes, the average day that homes are selling, the average days that they're on the market. So when you do your absorption rate pricing, if the average days on market is, say, 4 months, we don't want the seller to sign a listing agreement for 3 months, do we? Because the average in the neighborhood says it's going to be on the market for 4 months before I can sell it. So we can use that absorption rate pricing to kind of help us figure out where the market's looking, how long, how many days on market we have, and use that to help us set our length of time for listing agreements, not necessarily for buyers. But I imagine that'll be coming to you guys soon, so you can be on the lookout for that. But it's just another good tool and helping us get the accurate information to the sellers to help them, to best help them. Is there a standard fee for agents? We know that's no. The firm sets the commission, and it should be negotiable between the firm and the seller. And then it breaks it down into a couple sections. Here's a Q&A specifically for sellers. So if this person that you're going over the working with real estate agent disclosure with is a potential seller, you can just focus on this section. You don't have to read the whole 8-page brochure to them or tell them to read the whole 8-page brochure. If you're talking to a potential seller, you guys can just focus on this. I want to sell my property. What do I need to know about working with agents? Goes over what our duties are to the seller, what the listing agent can provide, how is the firm compensated? If the buyer, let's see, if your firm also represents the buyer, so it goes over dual agency. What is the risk if I agree to dual? How can I reduce the risk of dual agency? I mean, these are good questions the consumer has, right? When you start going on about dual agency, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't be my advocate. You can't offer advice. This doesn't sound like a good deal for me. But this form kind of helps us explain it, answers their question. Can I sell my property without hiring an agent? Sure. People buy and sell houses every day without us. I think it's going to get harder and harder for us to prove ourselves in the industry. What happens if the listing expires? And then we have a Q&A for buyers. So again, if this is the party, if this is the person you're talking to, you can just focus on this section. I want to buy real estate. What do I need to do about working with agents? Here's our duties again. Here's our written agency agreement specifically to the buyer. What services should the buyer agent provide? So we spell out what we should be doing. How is the buyer's agents compensated? We were talking about this last night, the lawsuit with NAR and DOJ. And there's a lot of sellers apparently that feel like it wasn't fair that I had to pay the buyer's agent's commission. So we might be coming into, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I wonder if how we're compensated isn't going to change depending on the outcome of this lawsuit. Remember, you guys, never look at a buyer and say, I work for free, or you don't have to pay me anything. Because always remember, as soon as you tell them that, they're going to be interested in a for sale by owner where the seller's not offering you compensation. And now you're going to have to go back to that buyer and say, oh, I know I said you didn't have to pay me, but. So y'all be very careful how you word that stuff when you talk about your compensation, please. What happens if I want to buy property listed by the same firm? What's our risk to dual? How do I reduce my risk to dual? What happens when the buyer agency expires? Can I buy a house without hiring an agent? Of course you can. So they put it all out there for them. The last piece of this, From an unrepresented buyer, could the real estate agent who represents the seller? Can the real estate agent who represents the seller require me to hire? No, you can't make them do that. The last little piece of this goes over termination of agency agreements. It's kind of funny to think about, but we need to have a conversation with the consumer. You know, if we have to end our relationship, this is how this goes down. Little blurb there. Have you guys looked this over yet? The Q&A brochure, seen this?
I'm
Few of
really
you?
glad you showed that to us because I see it in a lot of people's like listing presentation folders and their buyer presentation folders. And I've been wondering where they get them. So now I know that's
Here it
awesome.
is. Yep. And you know, I really like, and I don't know if I can. No, because that's a paid. The other thing, so here's the thing. I'm usually frugal and like the flat PDF, Ryan. But if you order the brochure, and I'll try to find it on break, see if I can't find it on break. But if you order the brochure, in the brochure, they actually have pictures. They have pictures that talk about what dual agency looks like and designated dual agency looks like. And I love the pictures. That was another woohoo the commission got from all of us a couple years ago when they're, so I'll see if I can't find the pictures. I know I can somewhere, just where they are. But find those pictures and we can go over those as well. But yeah, guys, there's so much here. You know, are you helping a buyer in a new subdivision? You know, here's that information. It's about, always remember this. It's about educating the consumer. And the commission provides us with the tools and the resources that we need. We don't have to recreate the wheel. It's all right here. And if we know we're going to ncrec.gov, right, don't go to Google and look for educating the consumer. Who knows what you're going to find? This is a validated resource. This is straight from the commission. You be familiar with this website because it really is a pleather and it can help us out in our businesses. Other comments on that? All right, so let's go ahead, take our first break. Let's see, I got 5:24. So let's come back at 5:35 and I'll look for those pictures and we can look at those when we get back. So let's take 10. Welcome back.
Yay.
Yay. When you go to, they want you to pay for this. But I thought, well, if you go to the Q&A brochure, maybe you can, you know, get a quick preview of it. But no, they just want you, and they're 30 cents each, by the way. So if you want to go order, Michael, you want a bunch for your trunk or whatever, you can get a few, you know, just to have some on hand. But I actually, because I went through the same kind of conundrum in pre-licensing. So at one point I found the pictures and I just put them in my pre-licensing slide. So I knew I could find them here. So when you have the actual brochure, again, it's this real nice glossy thing. It's like multi-fold, and it kind of accordions out and it opens up into, you know, a big long thing. And when you have the brochure, then they include the pictures as well. So it shows, there you go. There's Michael's accordion. Keep going, keep going. Yep. So big, long brochure there. Turn that over real quick. Yeah, there are the pictures. Perfect. So you got to have the actual brochure. Thanks, Vanna. You got to have the actual brochure to to have the pictures. But when you have the brochure, I think the pictures help kind of do a good job of explaining agency. So you got a buyer agency, seller agency relationship. You see how there's a red broker and a blue broker? That's indicating that these are with two different firms. So there's the red firm and the blue firm. Red firm's working with the buyer. See, I'm holding their arm. I got them through the transaction. Blue firm's working with the seller. We got their arm. We're going through this thing hand in hand. Dual agency. Now, how many firms do we have in dual agency? Dual agency, we just have the red firm, don't we? Just the one firm. This is a case of a 2-agent dual agency. And yeah, you got one agent hanging on to their buyer, different agent hanging on to their seller, but you also got the agents holding hands because we're with the same firm. It's not about the individual agent, it's about the firm. Single agent dual agency, again, one broker, one firm. Now I'm hanging on to both of my, both buyer and seller. And then we have our designated dual agency, still one firm, still the red firm, but you notice now they've dropped hands. And in designated dual agency, that exclusivity comes back. And we'll talk more about designated when we get to the dual agency section. But what do we think? Do we like the pictures? Do the pictures help? And it helps explain it to them with visuals. I'm a visual person. I think a lot of us are. Questions, comments on our working with real estate agent disclosures? While we're here, just a few other things. Commission information. If you need the real estate commission brochure, here's your license law and commission rule. Another place you can access those: real estate licensing in North Carolina. Some disclosure forms. So if you can't find your MOG or your RPODs, for example, you can always grab those in the commission. By the way, a fun fact, NCAR writes all of our pre-printed forms, right? The real estate commission does not provide our pre-printed forms, but the real estate commission does provide us with the MOG, the RPODs, and the working with real estate agent disclosure. So the commission forms that we have, they provide here. Practically everything else, all those other pre-printed forms are NCAR forms. Various guides, there's your safety guide. We're going to talk about safety in a minute. Residential square footage, we're going to talk about that in this class. This Q&A brochures, past bulletins, e-bulletins, and they have a pretty, I'll call it a decent search. So when you put in, if you put in the right thing, it's pretty smart. It's pretty good. Have you guys ever searched for something and it gives you the exact opposite of what you put in the field and you wondered what its algorithm was? So, but the commission search bar is pretty good. Update topics. These are former update continuing education classes. So if you want to go back and review the last time we talked about, I don't know, if you want to know what we did in CE last year, then you have all those topics. So here's, we did broker in charge, fiduciary duties, laws and rules, cybersecurity. So you have the various topics. Here's that manual. We looked at our digital manual. If you want to order that, and then rosters, licensees, new licensees. Did you ever feel more loved in your entire life than you did when you got your real estate license? How many mailings did you get? Everybody wanted to talk to you, didn't they? Didn't that feel nice? How did they, there you go. How did they get you? Ta-da, it's right here. They can purchase a list from the commission. You walked out to your mailbox and you thought, oh, another firm wants me. So that's where they got it. We'll look at more, but again, publications is where we are from the commission's website. And I think this is one of the more useful things for us. Questions, comments? The last little piece of this section that we're going to talk about is racial equality. And the Real Estate Commission's homepage the Real Estate Commission within the last couple of years has really ramped up their DEI department, diversity, equality, and inclusion. 3 months ago, they hired their first DEI officer that is there to facilitate the commission with the diversity, equity, and inclusion division of the commission to help make sure that the consumer protection, we're protecting the public, and that agents are following standards, fair housing standards, to make sure that we're all acting in accordance to fair housing. So the homepage is the resource, the commission's homepage is the resource for that information. We're going to go through and talk about a little bit of it. So what we're referring to now are equity issues. And this is something that came up last year's CE class. Again, the commission's really ramped up their awareness, creating awareness, and trying to help resolve outstanding issues and provide equal housing for all. The equity issues recognize that each person has a different circumstance, allocates exact resources and opportunities needed for that equal outcome. I think it's important that we remember for example, the big picture in fair housing, says that anyone, regardless of their members of the protected classes, should be able to live wherever they want to, as long as it's within their financial means. And with the commission dealing with the consumer with purchasing real estate and homes, then it's important that we make sure all licensees are following these protocols to make sure everybody has fair housing. So with equity issues, disparate impact, this is something that, on its face, it seems harmless, but in the end, it does harm members of the protected class. When we talk about this is going to be something, maybe a practice, maybe an old practice that hasn't been updated in time as time goes on. Maybe it's unintentional, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, there was disparate impact. There was some underlying conduct, even though it was unintentional, it still happened, and it made somebody feel less because of one of the members of the protected classes. So some examples of disparate impact, maybe the source of income. Maybe you're a landlord, for example, if you're going to rent a home to a tenant, you absolutely have the right to do a credit check, a background check, investigate your tenants. Again, fair housing says what we do for one, we do for all. So if you're going to run a credit report on one potential tenant, you need to run a credit report on all potential tenants. What this is saying, though, is the source shouldn't be discriminated on. Where does the income come from? As long as they can prove that they have the income, and obviously as long as it's a legal source, but where the income comes from should matter. People with disabilities, that innate thinking that people with disabilities, families with children, that's a familial status, and then race and national origin. So just some examples. The commission gives us implicit basis. Implicit basis, not the commission, excuse me, is defined as a basis or prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized. It's an unconscious attitude, an unconscious stereotype. Maybe it was ingrained in us when we were children, when we were young. I think it's important that we're aware of any implicit biases that we might have. Be aware of where our thoughts come from, these unconscious attitudes, these unconscious thoughts, and try to help squash them, clear them up, so we don't continue those implicit bases. How can we reduce? There's that conscious awareness, being aware of your thoughts, particularly your thoughts, your actions, your words. And then education, educating on the history of racial bias in housing. April is Fair Housing Month, so we have that coming up in a few weeks. NAR usually launches a lot of educational materials. I know my firm does a fair housing meeting in April. Again, helping to educate people can help reduce that implicit bias. Being knowledgeable about fair housing laws. We're going to go over fair housing in this class. We're going to do a review of the protected classes and who they are, that is. Company policies and procedures that may include racial equity, maybe training practices, again, awareness in the workplace, awareness in our day-to-day activities. NAR, you guys that have joined your local board of realtors in your new agent onboarding, did you get to do your code of ethics training? Got to learn about the 16 articles of the code of ethics. Within that is our commitment to eliminating racial actions in the real estate when we're working with buyers and sellers. NAR's provided us several good tools. For example, for those of you that are associated and are a member of NAR, there's a simulation. It's called You Are the Agent of a Fictitious Town. And that fictitious town is called Fairhaven. And they put you in different scenarios. It's kind of like Find Your Own Adventures. You guys remember those stories when we were little? Choose Your Own Adventure. And so they put you in different scenarios and working with several different groups of people. And you decide how to respond. You decide how to proceed. And based on your actions, based on your responses, they either try to give you some more education, or they say, you're doing good. But it's a good simulation. If you go to NAR's website, log on, just look for Fairhaven. Took me about an hour and a half. So make sure you devote some time to it to go through it. NAR also suggests that you do an implicit association test. You can just go to Google and search implicit test. And that test will help you evaluate any of your implicit biases. Maybe you weren't aware of your implicit biases or what those were. So this test will help you identify those. You can correct your attitudes, your actions, your behaviors. Maybe you're acting in a way that could be disparate against others. So it brings awareness and education to you. Help strengthen your career and yourself. Racial equality, again, commission has taken a big stance lately, the last couple of years. They've upped that and try to better handle racial equality. And one thing that the syllabus has offered us is several different definitions of racial equality. So to help us better understand what racial equality is, the Aspen Institute defines racial equality as a society in which people are no more or less likely to experience society's benefits or burdens because of the color of their skin. So Aspen Institute, society in which people are no more or less likely to experience benefits because of the color of their skin. The Center for Assessment and Policy Development defines racial equality as the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicated how one fares. City of Durham has weighed in. They define racial equality as the condition when racial identity cannot be used to predict individual group outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. Merriam-Webster defines it as the equity as a freedom from bias or favoritism. And again, other than the DEI job that was just developed, it was just created, brought in their first DEI officer. The Real Estate Commission has also made a commitment, and the big thing that the commission has done, other than the DEI officer, is kind of revisited some of their commission rules to make sure that everything is in compliance, everything is very relevant. So for example, 58A.1601 is their fair housing rule. This is the rule that says conduct by licensee which violates the provision of the state fair housing is going to be a violation of commission rule. If you get yourself in trouble with state fair housing or federal fair housing, the Real Estate Commission will probably weigh in on it, disciplinary action. 58A.0104, this is our agency agreement and disclosure rule that we talked about last night that we said you should read and read again. When you're done, read it again. So there's a section of 58A.0104, mandatory insertion of our non-discriminatory language in our agency agreements. We're going to see this verbiage when we look at our listing agreement. We'll see it when we look at our buyer's agency agreement. But the rule requires any written agency agreement that you and I use contain the non-discrimination clause. 58A.0120 prohibits discriminatory brokerage activities or promotion of a broker. Again, a violation of commission rule. Advertising, making sure that our ads are not discriminatory or prejudiced. HUD provides us with, gosh, last I looked, it was like a 40-something page document with words that could be seen, could be viewed as discriminatory or prejudice. And HUD isn't saying don't use those words. They're just saying be cautious, use these words favorably. Triad MLS, I can't speak for the rest. Maybe Canopy, I'm not sure. But I know Triad MLS, the first of last year, so 2022, they implemented a new software. And all these words from HUD's 109 Fair Housing Advertising Guidelines were added into the MLS software. So when you put that word, when you're typing your remarks or your agent only remarks, and you put that word in, it's going to flag it. And it's going to, it's not going to say you can't use it, but it's just going to say, warning, make sure you're proceeding properly. For example, I do input from my firm. And shortly after they implemented the software, I was putting a listing in for one of our builders. And I said something about the white kitchen cabinets, and it flagged the word white. And it wasn't telling me I couldn't use it. It was just saying, whoa, make sure you're using that word appropriately. So all those words on those 40-some pages are now highlighted to help us make sure that our advertising is handled properly. Housing Choice Voucher Program, this more applies to our Section 8 housing, our public assistant housing. There's various federal funds available to those that qualify for Section 8 housing. The landlords that are allowed to provide Section 8 housing have higher standards. We all have a standard where all landlords have a duty to provide fit and habitable conditions. But those landlords of Section 8 housing need to make sure they provide housing that is decent, safe, and sanitary. Landlords of those with public housing or Section 8 housing can't terminate the tenancy. They can't evict their tenants as easily as non-Section 8 housing tenants. Just a better layer of protection. The government's helping make sure that we keep roofs over those low-income families. And then with the equity issues, again, I think that the big thing we can do is help educate ourselves, check out NAR, check out the Real Estate Commission's website, help educate ourselves, and ultimately help educate the public. You guys very well may encounter a seller. And let's say, for example, you're at the listing appointment and the seller may look at you and say, I refuse to sell my house to somebody, fill in the blank, pick a member of the protected class, and the seller may not want to sell their house to anybody that falls under that category. And that's not the time for us to put our head in the sand and pretend that that didn't happen, pretend that those words just didn't come out. That's the time for us to make sure we explain our duties under license law and commission rule, our duties under fair housing, let the seller know that once a broker's involved, we can't discriminate. An offer is an offer and there is no discrimination. If the seller insists, if they keep on and keep on, it might be our best bet to walk away. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't want to work with that seller anyway. Maybe we want to get our BIC involved. Maybe we want to walk away. I don't know. But bottom line, fair housing says once an agent gets involved, then, you know, the seller, no party of the transaction can discriminate. So that seller needs to understand that when an offer comes in, it's about the amount. It's not about the buyer. It's not about who. It kind of blows my mind how many sellers I've heard of after the fact. They look the buyers up. They get an offer in and they go to Google or Facebook and look the buyers up. And I never really understood that, because bottom line, shouldn't it come down to whether or not they can afford to buy your house or not? So just again, making sure we're educating the public. Like I said, we may just have to refuse to work with that seller. They can't make us violate laws and rules. They can't make us violate fair housing, certainly. What comments do we have? One section down, 5 to go, trucking right along. So this next section is just specifically working with sellers. Maybe it's a residential transaction, maybe it's a commercial transaction. We're talking about working with sellers in any kind of sales transaction. And I want you to know going into this section, it's not my job to teach you guys how to get lots of listings. It's not my job to teach you how to get seller leads, listing leads. This section is just a matter of the what to do and what not to do, not how to do it. Does that make sense? So you guys, you know, think outside the box. You guys came on the call, Ryan and I were chatting about, and I'm not going to give away your secrets, but we were chatting about his lead generation and the importance of lead generation and keeping that pipeline filled. You guys are going to figure out what works for you. You know, and sometimes you have to try a couple different things. Maybe open houses, you have success at open houses. Maybe you have success in cold calling or door knocking or, you know, handing out brochures or, you know, whatever. But sometimes you just got to try a few things and see which one works, see which one sticks. So hopefully this section, again, teaching you what to do, what not to do, but more particularly helping you guys build that business so you can be here for the long term. Have any of your coaches yet? One of the ones I heard when I got into sales, have any of your coaches or trainers told you yet, put 5 business cards in your pocket when you walk out the front door, and do not come home until you've given out all those business cards. So it makes you 5 business cards a day, don't matter where, right? But it makes you put your card in, you know, it's a numbers game, right? You put your card in enough people's hands, somebody's bound to call you. You call enough people, social media, whatever your thing is. Farming neighborhoods, especially your neighborhood where you live. We have an agent in my office. He is like the master farmer. It's amazing. And his whole entire neighborhood knows who he is. We could almost quite call him the official realtor of that neighborhood, but of course we can't. But they all come to him. And it's because he does random things. He was talking today about doing a garage sale or a yard sale. He's like, it's not like I have a lot of stuff, but I know they have a lot of stuff. And what a great way to get the community together. I know last summer he rolled up with a Dippin' Dots food truck, or not Dippin' Dots, but what's the Kona Ice food truck? He brought that into his neighborhood and said, y'all come get you a Kona Ice. You know, that's the kind of thing that gets people's attention, isn't it? So be thinking about the outside the box, how you can get some business, how you can get this started. And again, as Ryan and I were discussing, you guys, I've known a lot of top producers over my years. And one habit I've always seen of my top producers is they're constantly feeding that pipeline. Even at their busiest, when they're slammed and they have 10 things under contract all at once, they're still out there prospecting. There's a myth to this industry that we're feast or famine. And if you're prospecting, if you're constantly feeding that pipeline, you can have a more steady stream of income. You let that pipeline dry up and you pretty much have to start over. You guys with me? So even at your busiest, even when you don't think you can handle anything else, send out your newsletters, do your farming, put those 5 business cards in your pocket. You know, keep doing what you're doing so that pipeline never dries up. Consistency is greater than intensity. I would agree. Be consistent. Find something that works for you and stick with it, you know? So all about sellers, all about working with sellers. We're going to look at our listing agreement in just a bit, but just some general requirements, any of your agency contracts. Always remember, I cannot perform a single service for an owner of a property without first having a signed agency agreement. And when we talk about an owner, obviously we're talking about a seller because that's the section we're in. But don't forget, this could also refer to an owner of a rental property. So if you ever go into property management, you can't do anything for the owner of that rental property without first having a signed written agency agreement. We know when we work with buyers, we can have an oral agency agreement at first. Sellers, we don't get to do that. Everybody good with that? Can't put a sign in the yard, can't measure house, can't do nothing until we have that signed agency agreement. All of our written agency agreements must, what's that word must mean? That's a pretty big word, isn't it? Must be signed by all parties. Remember, the parties to the agency agreement is the firm and the client. Most of the time, most of us are allowed to sign our agency agreements on behalf of the firm. As an affiliate of the firm, we're allowed to sign the agency agreement. And because we are the ones signing it most of the time, we're gonna have to include our license number. You guys did really good yesterday when I asked you to rename yourself and include your name and your license number. You know how many times in post licensing we gotta wait for somebody to run and grab their license and look up their number because I hadn't memorized it yet. So either you had it handy or you've already had it memorized. If you don't have it memorized, go ahead and do it because you need it everywhere you go. I tell my pre-licensing guys to just put it on a flashcard, memorize it so they can know what that number is. Our written agency agreements must have a definite termination date. When our agency agreements are over, they're over. Property management agreement does allow us for an automatic renewal, but that is the exception. And even then it has an end date. It's just whether or not we can allow for an automatic renewal. And then our agency agreements have that non-discrimination clause. So again, we'll see that when we look at our listing agreement.
As far as the pocket card, for those that might want to explore the idea, you can actually set up a widget and have it on one of your screens so that it's always on the face of your phone.
Cool. A widget for your pocket card.
So here, I'll show you guys real quick.
Yeah. Can't see it. Are you slugging? Okay. So you just got a cool. And boom. There he is. So you're ready to go to CE, you're ready for post licensing, you're ready for a commissioner to come into your open house. You are you are ready because, you know, to Michael's point, one of those general brokerage practices is that we always have to have our pocket card on us. So if you get the paper version, it's the size of a credit card. You cut out, literally just slip it in your wallet. You get the digital. Michael says you can get the widget. If you're kind of a nerd like me, I have both. So I'm never going to be anywhere without my phone and or my wallet. You know what I'm saying? So one way or another, I should be covered when the commissioner says, show me your pocket card. Thank you, Michael, and then that way, so to Michael's point, you really don't have to memorize your license number, do you? Because it's literally a click away. One less thing to take up brain space, right? I like that. Most of the time, most firms are what is referred to as full service firms. There is a new wave of firm coming in. You guys may have heard of them, called limited service firms, limited service listing firms. First off, I need to caution you guys on how we speak about limited service listing firms. Do not call them discount brokers. What's that imply to the public? It's like the bargain bin in the back of the store, right? They're not discount brokers. This could be a violation of antitrust laws, running around bad mouthing other companies. So first off, know our verbiage, limited service firms. And with these firms, they're not full service firms. Let's say their services are a la carte. So when the seller is signing up with a limited service firm, they're agreeing to the products that they want. So, and they pay per thing. So X amount to put your listing in MLS, X amount to put a lockbox on your front door, X amount to show the home to buyers, X amount to do an open house, right? The service and the firm and the seller have to select the services that the seller wants, and they only pay for what they take, what they get. So the fee is usually fixed or flat. Again, think of a la carte servicing. Here's the thing with limited service firms. They're only limiting the services. They're not limiting the duties that they owe to the seller. So even though they're only, $400, I'll put in an MLS. Once we sign, that firm still owes the seller OPAR. They may be in the back helping out, negotiating, communicating with the seller directly, but they're still offering OPAR. They're still doing their duties. I was a buyer's agent with a limited service firm, and my buyer actually found this house. I sent her open housing one Sunday. because I was doing an open house and she wanted to go. I said, go out and look on Sunday afternoon. By the way, the tip, can I offer you a tip? When I send my buyers open housing, I send them with a stack of my business cards. So when the agent says, are you working with an agent? They can, here you go. And that way I know who they're calling. So there's your free tip for the day. But anyway, I sent my buyer open housing and she called me at 4:02 because she knew I was doing an open house till 4 o'clock. She called me at 4:02 and said, Julie, I found the one. I want to write it up. I said, well, that was easy. I like this. So we wrote it up, come to find out it's a limited service. She said the seller was the one doing the open house. So obviously paying for the open house was not a service that they requested. The MLS instructed me to communicate with the seller, directly with the seller. To this day, transaction closed, one of the smoothest transactions I've ever had. To this day, I have yet to have any form of communication whatsoever with that listing agent. Obviously, that wasn't a service that they paid for. And that's what I mean. I'm sure that listing agent was still in the background coaching and guiding their seller. They just weren't communicating with me. When we got to closing, the settlement statement had my commission that my firm expected to collect. And it also had a flat fee. I think it was like $400 to the listing firm. Pretty much all they got paid to do was put it in MLS. That's what we mean by limited service. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. That seller was an investor. And he did this 12, 15 times a year, right? That's what he did, was buy and sold, buy and sold. So he was a lot more knowledgeable than maybe the seller that doesn't sell every so often. But again, doesn't matter. The services that the seller selects, the limited service firm still owes them old car. Specifically, the commission says that the broker from the limited service firm cannot waive their duties. We always have that duty to discover and disclose material facts when working with clients. Avoid making false promises. There's our undisclosed conflict of interest. Properly accounting for trust funds held by clients. This kind of looks like the list we looked at earlier today, doesn't it? Or earlier tonight. So the services are the same. They can't waive their duties to act competently, to properly deliver all offers and contracts. They got to comply with the Residential Property Disclosure Act, which we're talking about. They got to comply with the Lead-Based Paint Act, which we're going to talk about. Questions or comments on the limited service? We're seeing more and more of these. I want to say that 0.5% commission that I was offered, I think that was a limited service. So, you know, again, commission's negotiable. Always negotiable. Another thing that we kind of touched on last night, that now that we're working with sellers, we want to talk about, we could look at a protection agreement, have a protection agreement. If you've been hired as a buyer's agent and your buyer becomes interested in a for sale by owner, you're still in the transaction as the buyer's agent. The seller didn't hire you, they're not representing you, but we're still communicating with the seller because there is no listing agent to talk to. So all of our communication is directly with the sellers. Isn't it in my buyer's best interest to get them through this transaction? So communicating with the seller, getting them through that transaction. And the question we had last night was, if the for sale by owner agrees to pay your commission. So you have a buyer, they're interested in a FSBO. You call the FSBO and you say, I have somebody that wants to see your home tomorrow at 2 o'clock. They say, that's great, we'll see you then. And you say, are you willing to cooperate with me? Are you willing to compensate with me? And the for sale by owner says, oh yeah, sure, not a problem. Y'all gonna take them at their word? Not even a little bit, are you? No, y'all, I'm telling you, nobody's gonna look out for your commission like you. So when they say, yeah, I'm going to pay you, then we're going to offer this protection agreement. What this does is, again, and we're not hiring you, the FSBO is not hiring you. It's just protecting when they say, yeah, we'll pay you. So if they do agree, if the for sale by owner does agree to pay you, in addition to the protection agreement, well, actually, whether or not if the FSBO agrees to pay you or not, what do we need to go over with the for sale by owner? What do we need to make sure that they understand early on in the relationship?
That we represent the buyer.
Yeah, especially for the for sale by owner, right? We need to make sure that FSBO knows my loyalty is to the buyer. You may be the one paying me. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Doesn't matter. That for sale by owner needs to understand that my loyalty is to the FSBO. What else does that FSBO need to really, really, really understand? That I don't owe them.
Old car.
In the C and O car specifically,
Confidentiality.
that's right. Make sure that seller knows whatever you tell me, it is my duty, it is my obligation to share with my buyer. Make sure that for sale by owner knows that talking to me, you might as well be talking directly to my buyer. You guys with me? So make sure that FSBO, so whether or not they pay you or not, we should make sure we're reviewing the working with real estate agent disclosure. And then the form that we have for it is probably one of the longest name forms that we have, but it sums it all up, doesn't it? This is the unrepresented seller, meaning they haven't hired anybody, they're for sale by owner. Disclosure and fee agreement standard form 150. What we're going to do, go out real quick and just look at that form. By the way, all your forms, and we're on the online learning system, all your forms here under the welcome section, this link to 2022 forms. And when you click on this, somehow, I do not know how this works because Jane's a lot smarter than I am, but somehow Jane managed to get all these loaded up for us in our online learning system. So for those of you that have affiliated, you have access to all the forms, but I think there's only like 1 or 2 of you that hasn't affiliated yet. If you're not affiliated yet, you're welcome to grab anything. Everything we have here to offer you, of course, is a sample form, so you can't take it out and use it. But if there's anything you want to look at, review, every single form NCAR offers is in that folder. So you have that. So the unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement, it says a selling agent represents the buyer. So this is an agreement between the seller and the firm. Seller is the owner of the property known as 123 Main Street. Seller is selling the property without the assistance of a license. However, the firm has the client. We're going to name that client who would like to see the property. Does that say buy the property, make an offer on the property? No, we just want to get in the front door. I want to hash out my commission to make sure you're going to pay me before I ever bother showing your home. If the seller sells to the firm, seller agrees to pay the firm a fee of X amount. Is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage? Even though it's not an agency agreement, it's still communicating with the public. So here's our non-discrimination clause, letting the seller know that we're going to conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to the race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status of any such party or prospective party. Further, letting the FSBO know that realtors have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to the sexual orientation or gender identity of any parties or prospective parties. Talking about the fee, when we earn our fee, talking about our buyer agency, seller acknowledges that the firm is the agent representing the client with respect to the property. The firm has a duty to act on behalf of the client and will not be acting on behalf of the seller. Seller is advised to keep this in mind with communicating with the firm. And then a reminder to the seller, if we haven't done it already, don't forget we need to do your working with real estate agent disclosure. seller and firm size. Obviously, if they're not going to pay you, then we just need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure. Questions on that? It's been my experience. FSBOs go one way or the other. We'll just leave it at that. I've had some say, I had one, oh, it was awful. It was awful. I called and I said, you willing to pay me? He's like, no, I'm not going to pay you. I said, hey, great, that's good. So I said, all right, so I got buyers that are interested. I said, can you tell us what you're asking? Well, we don't really have an asking price in mind. So how about your buyers just make an offer and we'll see where we want to go from there. I thought, you don't really know how this works, do you? You know, and then the seller, so, you know, like, oh, all right, so tell me about your house, you know. So then he starts rattling off. All I heard after that was custom built this and custom built that and custom designed this. And I don't know, all I heard was cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And I took that back to my buyers and they were like, yeah, no, we're good. And I was like, oh, thank God. Don't ever know what happened with that one. But then again, I've also worked with some for sale by owners that have been great. So remember what we said last night, if it's important to my buyer, it's important to me. And if that's the home they want. All right, let's see. I think we're close enough. We're at a good break point. So I have 6:23 just turned. So let's say 6:34. Is that the time right? I don't know why I can't add 10 to the time. 6:34. Okay. It's hard. Okay. All right. So let's take 10, whatever that means to you. We'll come back and keep working with sellers.
That was a fast hour.
It was, wasn't it?
See you in a bit.
Welcome back.
I know my dogs appreciate my breaks.
They get food or loving? Which one is it?
This break, they got food.
So
kind of
it
dog you
depends
got,
on the
Michael?
break. Huh?
I
What,
got a
Ryan?
blue-
So what kind of
My
dog you
small-
got, man?
My small one is a blue nose pit, and my big one is a 155-pound nose.
Everybody loves a dog.
I use them for protecting the animals on the farm.
Nice. How much that 155-pound dog eat a week?
Shit, I don't even know.
That's a big dog.
I can tell you, I buy. Give me a second here. I got to think about this one. Between the two of them, they go about 45 pounds of food a week.
Wow. Wow.
You getting them the old red?
What was that now?
You getting them that the old red dog food?
No, I get them the good poshy stuff from Food Lion, the Fresh
Ooh.
Pet.
Yeah, my wife's the same way, man. She gets that little Caesar stuff, the purple and blue bag, the bougie stuff.
These suckers, I tried to save a couple dollars here about 3 weeks ago. I started going back to the old hard, crispy kibbles. The bowl sat there for 3 days. They didn't touch it.
They had to been hungry. That's great. Absolutely love our four-legged family members. You know, a part of the family as well.
I can tell you that their food is good enough for cranberries and salmon and chicken and carrots and sweet potatoes. I'll throw it in the microwave someday if I have to.
I was gonna say, they may be eating better than I am on some days. You know, life of a real estate agent.
I had a ham and cheese sandwich for dinner.
I was gonna say, are you guys good at eating in your car? If not, you will be. You'll get good at it, I promise. You know, if you're hungry enough, right? Any questions about our protection agreement? Again, a buyer's agent working with a for sale by owner. For sale by owner agrees to pay us. So we're going to make sure we secure that agreement in a written form. Thank you, NCAR, for providing us a form to use. Another thing with working with sellers, once they hire us, part of our listing agreement usually states that once they hire us, we agree, and as a member of, to put their listing in the MLS, the multiple listing services. I took a class with the Real Estate Commission not too terribly long ago. And I want to say they said there were like 40 some MLSs across our state. I'm aware of like 3, Triad, Triangle, and Charlotte, you know, but evidently a lot of our smaller areas, smaller markets have smaller MLSs. All local MLSs, we like, for example, the Triad MLS is actually made up of multiple board of realtors. So you have the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors, High Point Board of Realtors, Greensboro Board of Realtors, who else? Asheboro, Lexington. All those board of realtors come together to form the Triad MLS. And the MLS is just an opportunity for their members to share their listings. It creates inventory. Guys, at the end of the day, we're salesmen. And salesmen need a product. They need inventory. They need something to sell. And if you don't currently have a listing, or if you don't have but 1 or 2 listings, you don't have much of inventory, do you? So by us agreeing to pool our listings, we're agreeing to work together, cooperate together, and it allows us to share everybody's listings. I currently right now have no listings myself, but because I'm a member of the Triad MLS, I have access to like 2,200 or something like that. So the MLS allows us to work together. Again, it's in the best interest of our seller The other thing that the MLS allows us to do is to cooperate with each other. In other words, if you bring me a buyer, I promise to compensate you X amount. So if you're a member of that MLS, when you look the listing up, it's going to show you how much you stand to make when you sell that house. When I have a buyer that calls, it's amazing to me how we learn commission math. Some of you may be sitting and go, I'm not good at math, but I'm telling you, when a buyer calls and says, I want to see 123 Main Street, you look it up at MLS, they're offering you X amount. While you're still on the phone scheduling an appointment, in your head, you're calculating how much you're going to make when you sell 123 Main Street. Don't tell me you're not good at math. We can all do commission math, can't we? But it gives us an idea. And guys, remember, your firm sets the policy of what they expect to collect when you work with this buyer. So if the listing firm isn't offering you enough, again, my example last night of the 0.5% of commission, I'm not going to tell you what my firm expects to collect, but I am going to tell you my firm expects more to collect than 0.5%. So, but that's all they were offering. That's their agreement. That's their right. So then it became up to me to get the rest from my buyer. Please also remember, I think this is new information for a lot of new agents. So let's make sure we're good on this. You're only guaranteed commission in the MLS that you're a member of. If you're ever going to go outside of your MLS, you need to call that firm or that listing agent and see what and if they're willing to cooperate with you. Okay, so if you want to go, Frederick, if you want to come up to Winston and show a home, you just need to call that listing agent, assuming you're not a member of Triad MLS as well. But you can do it anywhere in the state of North Carolina, right? But for your protection, you just want to make sure that they're willing to cooperate with you, because there is no agreement because we're different MLSs. Does that make sense? Some listing firms may not offer a non-member as much because, like, your super boxes, your super keys only work for your MLS. So if I'm going outside of my MLS and I got to have somebody else get me in the front door every time I go, right? I may not know a home inspector in your market, so I might be relying on you. So some listing firms may keep more than what they would give to a non-member, with the expectation that they're going to have to do more work for that non-member than if they were working for a member. Did everybody good? I don't think that's a testing point, but I think that's just a life lesson. Make sure you guys are all good on. I don't want to see any of you work for free. Get to the end of the transaction, I say, you're not my MLS. I don't know you any money. And you're standing there going, but I thought. Deal with it before you show the property, before you go. When listings go in MLS, the listing agent is responsible for the accuracy of the information in MLS, even if you have somebody else doing your data entry. Some firms have a data entry team. That's all they do is just sit around and enter listings. Doesn't that sound like a fun job? Some people may hire an unemployed or an unlicensed employee to do their data entry. Maybe you have another agent you're working with and they're doing your data entry. Doesn't matter who's putting it in. The person that's going in as the listing agent is the one that's responsible. I'm a big fan of proofing, a couple different sets of eyes being on it before it goes out. Y'all know how the internet works, right? Once you hit submit, it's out. Just like that. So be careful, make sure before you hit that button. And we see a lot of disclaimers. The commission reminds us disclaimers don't protect us. We cannot get out of liability because of a disclaimer. An example of one I see often in listings is they'll give us the schools and then they'll say buyer to verify. It is still the listing agent's responsibility to make sure that if they're going to advertise the schools, that they advertise the right schools, even if you put that disclaimer in. Should the buyer be verifying anyway? I guess the answer to that is if the schools are important to them, if they want to make sure they're getting their kids in a certain school district, then they need to be verifying that information anyway. Pride MLS schools aren't a required field. I don't think Canopy is either. So you have the option to put those in or not.
I
So
know,
working with, yeah,
over here in the triangle, around Lillington and Fuquay and all that, we're not allowed, because the schools are so capped right now. We have to basically kind of say, you got to do your research as to what schools will allow your kids.
interesting. And you get, I mean, you get redrawing of school lines, school districts and everything, and that gets, there was a new development here in High Point a couple years ago. I want to say there's like, I heard 250 homes, and it's pretty close to completion, but that's huge. When you get 250 homes, I mean, think about how many kids this is, right? So whatever school that was, they probably had to go through and at least revisit, reevaluate those lines to make sure that they're proportioned throughout the county. So yeah, school lines change, absolutely.
Another thing that they're doing too is instead of doing the normal summer off type thing, some of the schools here, they're in Harnett County, they're making them all year round now. They're trying it in a couple of the elementaries and whatnot to see how it goes because of the extra kids coming in. So
Interesting. Interesting. Man, I don't know. As a former kid, I like my summers, but that did not prepare us for adulthood, did it? What's that about?
adulting gets 1 star, maybe.
Depending on the day, right? I hear you loud and clear. Antitrust laws, again, come in when we're working with sellers. The whole idea, first off, let's understand the whole idea of antitrust laws. And by the way, the specifically is the Sherman Antitrust Act that gives us the antitrust laws. And the whole point with the antitrust laws is to prohibit monopolies. Understand real estate is a market, and a healthy market has free trade. So if you have monopolies, then you're restricting, you're regulating that trade. So Sherman's Antitrust Act comes in, they try to keep that trade free and open, try to not have restrictions, and be careful about the competition that it can offer. So with our antitrust laws specifically, one thing they give us is price fixing. Who determines the commission? Who determines the fee that the firm expects to collect? Is it the North Carolina Real Estate Commission? There you go.
The firm.
The firm. It's not the commission. It's not the North Carolina Association of Realtors. It's not the local board of realtors. It's not all 7 of our firms coming together and agreeing on the commission that we're going to charge. Each firm sets their own commission. We need to be really careful when we're working with sellers and we're in these listing appointments. At some point in the listing appointment, the seller's going to look at you and say, how much commission do you charge? We need to be careful about how we respond to that. Do not look at the seller and say, all of us in Charlotte charge X amount, or the standard in the Raleigh area is X amount. We don't need to give any kind of implication that we're working together, that we're price fixing our commission rates. When the seller asks you that, your response is, my firm charges X amount. It's in your firm's policy. You know how much they expect to collect. You know if you have some wiggle room. We talked last night about maybe reducing your commission. So are you allowed to reduce it? And if so, by much? That's going to be up to your firm's policy. Always remember, it's the firm's commission. They share their commission with you, not the other way around. I've heard so many agents over the years upset. One of the former firms that I used to work with, I remember they adjusted their commission plans and they went up on some of their fees. And I had some upset agents, which I understand, I get that. But the thing is they were stomping around going, the firm's taking my money, the firm's taking my commission. No. The firm shares their commission with you. And bottom line, you guys, always remember, we're independent contractors. So if you don't like the compensation split that your firm offers, find a new firm. Never ever call the real estate commission and say, Julie's real estate shop is taking too much of my money. You know what they're going to say? So what? Leave Julie's real estate shop and find another firm to go to. Ryan has thoughts on commission.
Hey, I was just curious. I wanted your take on something that came up today, actually. So on a buyer agency agreement in particular, on the first page, you write out 3% of resale, 5% of vacant land, et cetera, plus a $350 transaction fee. That's what I was wanting to ask you about, was the transaction fee. Do you typically put that on to your buyer, or is that a cost you take on? Just curious for your thoughts on that.
My firm takes that off the top. So that may be a firm, how they handle that, but we charge, a percentage, and then everything comes from that. It all starts with that percentage. And I know what you're talking about in the buyer's agency agreement, and even with the listing agreement that we'll look at in a minute, we may want to break down, because your firm may have a different policy if you're working with a resale or new construction or vacant land or for sale by owner, right? So there might be different commission splits depending on who you're working with. But yeah, check with your firm on that, Ryan, to make sure that you're properly according to what they want you to do.
Yeah, will do. I was mainly just curious about the transaction fee, because I thought that was something that we as agents handle, but then they were kind of telling me that we could outsource that to these people called Base, and that's where the fee comes in. And then I've just heard different thoughts, where some people don't think that's right to stick the buyer with that fee, and some people think that they should do it. So I'm just curious.
It's all negotiable, isn't it? So, yep. And I mean, bottom line, kind of like us, if we're not happy with our firm split, we go to another firm. Same thing with your buyer. If they're not happy with that being nickel and dime, can't they find, look, they'll work with Michael. Michael will take them, he just said. So yeah.
Right, I was telling Julie, yes, excuse me, when I first came in before everybody else was here, because I didn't know what time we had to really get in here to get everything situated. And I was just telling her, a little background, the company I was originally going to affiliate with. I mean, I'm affiliated with EXP, but the local firm, as I got to reading the paperwork, it basically worked out. You take the 20% off for EXP, and then it could be.
No names.
Sorry?
No names.
I'm not dropping any. Oh, well, just the main. Okay, sorry.
No more names.
Okay. So this firm was upwards of an additional 60%. So ultimately, out of each deal, I could have been passing off 80% of my money. I'm like, well, that's not right. So I found another team, and I've now affiliated with that team, and it's actually the flip-flop, where I get 80%, which is beautiful. So
yeah, that's great, man. Congrats on that. I won't say names, but the first firm that I interviewed was very similar. It was a 20-80 split. 20 went to the agent, and the only difference is, you got fed leads, which starting out, I might be better, but it just wasn't something I was interested in.
Where you got in time, yeah. It's a lot to take in getting started, independent contractor. You got a bottom line, you got to see what's best for you, your finances. Like you said, if you're only getting 20%, what do you get? I doubt you had to pay for signs. I doubt you had to pay for lock boxes, and you got leads, so if you affiliate with a firm, there are firms that'll offer you 100% commission, right? They may have a transaction fee, and then you get everything after that, for example. But guess what? You're paying for your own signs. You're paying for your own lock boxes, right? So you just really need to sit down. I know most of you are affiliated, but if you ever move or whatever, I always encourage you to shop around, talk to a couple, and see how it balances out. And, I hear a lot of new agents that shop around, and they, I think a lot of times the bottom line, it all shakes out, but that, again, it needs to be what's best for you.
I mean, I can tell you, between the two, the old and the new, they both provide signs, they both provide business cards, they both provide mentorship, they both provide just about every darn thing the same. The biggest difference was the split. and also who monitors what as far as doing WWREAs, legal issues, whatever. The second one now is such a better fit, and it's about branding me and what I list, sell, help, as far as buyers, not branding a firm.
Good. Good.
And then one more thing, I'm too old to work for 20%.
Did you leave with that?
I'm-
I
I'm-
just,
I'm coming in the game at 49 years old. I'm not trying to live in my mother's basement working for 20% of a commission. No, thank you.
I have a question just because I'm still very, very new to this. But what do you think about a 50-50 split? Like anyone can jump in, but is a 50-50 split a good commission rate, or is that
I think it
bad?
depends on what they're offering. And that's what 'cause isn't that the number one question? What's in it for me? So I think you need to with 50-50 split, what are they offering? Kind of their product list, if you will, and that's where I really encourage you guys as new agents, especially as you're learning the industry and the different splits, to shop around. Just so you have something to compare and contrast before you make that decision. The other thing is new agents, you guys, just as, again, most of you are affiliated, so it might be a little late for this conversation, but make sure you read those independent contractor agreements to find out what happens when you leave. Because it might be they offer you free training, but then the fine line says, as long as you're here for 3 years. If you leave within 3 years, you got to cut us a check for X amount. You guys with me? So make sure you know what happens when you leave. New agents, seasoned agents, 50 years from now, you guys still be reading that independent contractor agreement.
You also need to know whether or not there's a non-compete, and if so, what the mileage is and so on and so forth, that you have to be away from them.
Exactly. I know it's funny because you're excited, you're just joining, you're ready to sign, and we're talking about when you leave, so it's so far-fetched to think about, but you got to think about it.
Yeah, I'll tell you this too, Miss Teresa. I wouldn't get too caught up on the splits because that's what I focused on instead of the other things that they had to offer. And especially being so new, if you're getting your own leads, like you have to think of how long it's going to take to get these leads and how long it's going to take to convert those leads. I mean, you very well could be looking at 3 to 4 months before you ever see any kind of money. And that's something nobody told me, and I wish they would have, because I did have money set aside to get into real estate and I was prepared for that. But I kind of came in the game thinking, oh, well, I'm going to get a paycheck within a month. And that's not realistic especially if you're not getting fed leads. So I just want to put that out there because that's something I wish somebody would have told me.
So like when you say getting fed leads, there's companies that just like give you listings like nonstop, or
You
Well,
generally have to pay for those.
oh, okay.
Again, it goes back to office policy. So if the office, part of their 50% commission, if they're going to provide a pool of leads for all the agents to utilize, that's great. But the first instance that I was in, they fed leads to the top producers first. And then anything that was left, they gave the junk to anybody else. And I never saw any. So I just said, bye-bye.
Okay. But finding your own leads is really like finding your own clients, like handing out your business card, talking to people, starting a conversation.
Center of influence. Yep. Yep.
And
Okay.
typically the bigger the split, the more responsible you're going to be for getting your own leads. Like that firm that I mentioned before with the 80-20 split, the main reason for you getting such a low split was because they're feeding you leads. So you're essentially paying for that out of your commission.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Of course.
Anytime.
Thank you guys for that. It's been so long since I've been a new agent, I forget sometimes what it's.
You're not missing anything, trust me.
Agreed.
You'll get there. One day before long, you guys are, I've been in the industry for 21 years, so just wait, you'll get there.
I'll be 70 at that point and I'll be retiring. Thank you.
I know a lot of agents that age that are still out doing it. Had one look at me in particular. She was probably early 70s. She looked at me, she said, everybody tells me to retire. She said, but Julie, when you retire is when you get old. She said, I don't want to get old. I said, good for her. Okay, let's see. Our antitrust laws, price fixing, again, just be very careful in the wording with the seller and the buyer when you're talking about your fees. Make sure that you are very clear that this is your firm's policy, that we're not all collaborating together to set our commission. The other thing that antitrust laws gives us is group boycotting. And group boycotting is when 2 or more agents or 2 or more firms come together and try to push somebody out of the market, try to push somebody out of the industry. Let's say, for example, my buyer has a bad experience with a home inspector. Well, first off, can we all agree everybody has a bad day every once in a while? Do you have a bad day sometimes? I know I do, you know, so maybe that home inspector just had a bad day, not making excuses, but I'm just saying before you jump to conclusion. If, however, you don't want to assume that and you just think it's a bad home inspector, you don't have to recommend to your next buyer that home inspector. You don't have to have them on your preferred vendor list. That's fine. You don't have to recommend them. What group boycotting says is what you can't do is get together with other agents in your firm and say, okay, let's agree that none of us are going to use that home inspector again. That's us coming together and collaborating and trying to drive that home inspector out of the business. I promise you, if the home inspector is bad enough, they will drive themselves out of the business. They don't need your help. So we don't have to get engaged in that conversation. There's a very popular home search website that rhymes with Willow. And a couple years ago, they got licensed and it shut us all up. I was like, dag, nabbit. But they're now the same level we are. And I mean, if you've been following, they've had some interesting stories in the last couple of years since they got their license. But we just need to be careful on that collaboration, that group boycotting for the purposes of driving somebody out of business. Remember, it's about keeping an open market with free trade and no regulations, no restrictions. Any last questions or comments on our antitrust laws? Kind of nice segue into the conversation we just had, Teresa, is about how you can solicit, how you can get customers, how you can get clients. And there's various things on how we can find clients. Really what the commission offers us is things that we can't do. But that's helpful because then we can kind of think outside the box and how we can get business. So the first thing we can't do is solicit somebody else's active listing. So if you're going through the MLS and you see a home for sale in the MLS, an active listing, you cannot contact that seller. If they're active in MLS, they're in an agency agreement. That's the only way they can be in MLS. When it expires, if it's withdrawn, now can you contact that seller? Sure, it's kind of free game, right? And I know agents, that's one of their ways, Teresa, to solicit business is they approach expired sellers. So there may be something there, but as long as they're expired, not active. What about buyers? I know pre-licensing students tell me all the time. They go open housing and one of the first questions out of the agent's mouth is, are you working with an agent? I'm not being nosy. I just want to know so I can know how to proceed. Do I want to try to carry or get this relationship? Do I want to get you as a buyer? Do I know that's a hands-off thing? My favorite buyers that come into open houses are ones that were trained and trained well by their agent. They walk in the door and you say, hey folks, how are you doing? We have an agent. I say, cool, it's okay. I'm like, you have a good agent too. They did really, really good with you. So respecting that, asking that, and honoring that, absolutely. Could you imagine? Let's say I have a listing. Could you imagine? Let's say I have a listing and I don't know, I'm not a really good agent. I only have one picture in the MLS and it looks like I was like standing on one leg in the driveway, you know, kind of, it's not a good picture. And I have the bare minimum and I don't have any attachments and I just public remarks just says house for sale, right? I mean, it's a poor listing. Could you imagine how easy it would be for any one of you to call my seller and be like, yeah, I can do a much better job than this person, but we can, it's not allowed, even though we know we can do better than that. It's not allowed. If you attempt to solicit somebody else's either active listing or buyer, you could be subject to what's known as tortious interference. Tortious interference is, whoops, what'd I do? There it goes. Kind of the legal term. It's a wrongfully interfering with somebody's business relationship. So the agent that you're soliciting, they could go after you for tortious interference. That's a court thing, by the way. You could be civil to damages or subject to damages. Of course, the real estate commission and your local board would probably frown upon that as well. So no soliciting. We can't reach out to somebody else's active client. But the $1 million question is, what if they call me? What if the seller calls me and they say, I'm not happy with my agent. They only have one picture in and it's horrible. And I'm just not pleased with this whatsoever. First off, I need you guys to document the heck out of this. If they reach out to you, I need you to save that email, save that phone call, right? You with me? I need you to prove, I need you to show that they reached out to you first. We could discuss the terms of possibly listing their home, but we need to be very clear that this isn't and can't happen either until it expires or their current firm releases them from the listing. They terminate the agency agreement. And I'm not going to take them at their word, those guys. If they say we terminated, I'm going to say, show me your termination agreement. I need to see that. But we can have the conversation, just making sure that it's clear that this can't happen. We can't proceed until they're no longer in an agency relationship with the current firm. I think the gentlemanly thing to do also would be to suggest that they talk to their current broker in charge. You're not happy with the listing agent. Did you discuss this with their BIC? You're still in this relationship for a couple months, weeks, whatever, how long it's good for. Don't tell them, oh, just call the BIC and terminate. Tell them to reach out to the BIC. Not all personalities mesh well, do they? Maybe if this agent isn't working for the client, maybe the BIC wants the opportunity to connect them with somebody else. Maybe the BIC can try to salvage the deal. So again, it's about us honoring that existing relationship and understanding when it's over. Well, yeah, that's when we can jump in. That's when we can get on that. So soliciting, again, if they reach out to you, y'all please document that. Make sure that it's make sure that it's clear that they reached out to you first. Another thing we can do, maybe, to get business is some cold calling. However, before you pick up the phone, you need to get your hands on the do not call list, the do not call registry. We cannot cold call anybody that's on the do not call registry. The FCC regulates the do not call. They suggest that we get a new registry every 31 days, once a month, pretty much, that you're going to do this cold calling. And then the recommendation is also that you have an internal firm list. Bottom line with the do not call, if they're not on the do not call registry, then we can call. But if they ever tell us to stop calling, we need to honor that request. So it might not be a bad idea for your firm or your team to have an internal list, because they're not telling you to stop calling. they're telling the firm. Remember, you're acting as an agent. You are an agent of your firm. Anybody go on the cold calling route? I used to say the phone book. I guess now I got to say 411.com.
Yeah, I checked it on FSBOs if I was going to call on FSBOs, and most of them are on there.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are. I don't understand how spammers and robocallers don't have to follow. Y'all get spam calls like multiple a day. Does it drive you nuts? And unfortunately, we're in real estate, so we see a number we don't know. I mean, we're supposed to answer that. Could be client, right? But then we just got another spam online. But yeah, if you're going to go that route, and like you said, I think a lot of people are on the do not call these days. So you wouldn't have fewer lists to call. Speaking of FSBOs, if you have a buyer that's genuinely interested in the for sale by owner, they're interested in that listing, then we have the right to call, even if they're not on, even if they are, even if they are on the do not call registry. What we can't do is call that FSBO to solicit their listing. So if we're calling that FSBO, it's because we have a genuinely interested buyer. This is not you using your BFF trying to get in the front door, right? You have a genuinely interested buyer, somebody that's actually interested in the property. And like you said, when you're calling on behalf of your buyer. You're not calling to solicit the listing. If you want to go after a FSBO, we're going to talk about some things that you can do to solicit in just a second. Some exceptions to the do not call. You can call if they are on the do not call. You can call them if you have permission. If they tell you, yeah, call me anytime. You can call somebody on the do not call that you've had a previous business relationship with for up to 18 months. So you just got out of the listing agreement, just expired, or even you just helped your buyer buy a house. You had a former previous relationship. They were once your client. Even if they're on the do not call, we can call them for up to 18 months. If it's a consumer inquiry and they're on the do not call, we can call them for up to 3 months after the inquiry. For example, somebody comes into your open house and puts their phone number on your open house registry, or maybe they fill out the contact me form on your website and they include your phone number, or their phone number. Somehow you've gotten this consumer's phone number, in which case they've pretty much given you permission to call. And then, of course, personal relationships. Wouldn't that be horrible if your mama told you to stop calling? But those personal relationships, again, we can call. But guys, bottom line with the do not call, even with these exceptions, always remember that we've got to honor their request. So if they say, please stop calling me, we've got to honor that request, which I think is fair. I think we all get so tired of all these solicitations. If you guys will, if you got your books in front of you, turn with me to page 231. And Teresa's my digital. It's very close. I'm in chapter 9. I wonder if I can find this written. I'm in chapter 9 and I'm under the working with sellers. We're very early in the working with sellers. But 231 gives us, they call them safe harbor practices. And we want to make sure that we're in compliance with the do not call laws and rules. We want to make sure that we're in this safe harbor compliance. So we want to do things like understand the law and the rules. By the way, this applies to both the firm and the broker, the individual agent. So making sure that we understand the do not call laws and rules. Establishing the firm should establish a written policy to be in compliance with the do not call. What do they expect? How do they expect their agents to handle it? How do they expect them to follow those policies? The firm should monitor and assure compliance, make sure, again, their agents are doing what they're supposed to do. The firm should probably maintain a company. That's that internal list that we were referring to a few minutes ago. Both the firm and the broker should check that registry every 31 days. And I have no idea what the cost of that registry is. Anybody? The cost?
Expensive.
Is it?
Oh, no, the penalty's expensive. No, I don't know about the other question.
Okay. But get your hands on that list every 31 days. And then also both the firm and the broker should keep, because what do we document? What's that last bullet point said? Keep records, keep documentations. And again, you guys, when somebody says, Ryan, for the love of God, please stop calling me, we need to honor their request. I have a teammate. She's got a buy or die policy. She says, I'm going to stay on them until they buy a house or until they tell me to stop calling. That hurts her. So with the do not call laws and rules, I mean, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Well, we could be looking up to penalties. You could be looking at federal and state fines. This is random. Federal fines could be up to $43,792. $43,792 per call. So what's the big deal about calling somebody that's on the do not call registry? I don't got $44,000 laying around. I don't know about you. State fines could run up to $500 for the first violation, $1,000 for the second, and $5,000 for third or more after that. So is it worth it? I mean, I don't know. Is that list expensive? I'm sure it is, but so are the fines, so are the fees. So again, if that's the route you want to go, picking up the phone, you just need to be, that's the key. You need to get your hands on that do not call registry and honor that list. The other thing we talk about with soliciting sellers, buyers too, but with soliciting clients, the other thing that we need to be aware of is something called the CAN-SPAM Act. And this is what regulates unsolicited emails, bulk emails, unsolicited emails. You guys ever get junk email? One thing you're going to notice, one thing that the CAN-SPAM Act does, when you get that junk email, you should have the option to unsubscribe. Sometimes it's like teeny tiny and you really got to look for it. I don't know if there's any regulations on whether you can see it or not, but you should, all unsolicited emails should have the ability to unsubscribe, have that opt-out option. This applies to email. This also applies to fax. If the person replies and says, please remove me from your email list, we've got to honor that. So if they reply instead of hitting the unsubscribe button, again, if they say stop emailing me, then we need to honor their request. So I've given you guys a list of things that you can't do or things you need to be aware of when you're soliciting customers. So now that we know what we have restrictions on, what are some things that we can do? What are some things we can do to help get our name out there to the public?
Business cards, flyers, just go down aisle 4 at Harris Teeter or Food Line.
With your name badge on, right? Business cards, flyers.
I mean, you can do advertising in restaurants. I know of a local company who does advertising on TV screens, and he's got 10 different locations. I'm fixing to sign up on that here in the next day or so.
Nice.
Get my name out with that. And I don't know what else. I mean, aside from having to pay for something through the mother company here, I don't know. So we'll see.
What else you guys think? That's a great start. some of the things we think would be a good way to get your name out there? You guys worried we're gonna give away your secrets?
I don't know. I'm pretty strong believer in just relationship building.
Sure.
What about social media?
Social media platforms. I'm
Bill,
hearing this year TikTok is where it's at, so
I'm not getting into TikTok, but anyway, Facebook, Instagram, I've got 2 professional pages with those. And I post, especially Facebook, I'm posting on that all the time.
good. Good. It's constantly reminding people that you're there. And social media is a great platform. Especially because it starts with people that it starts with your center of influence, right? So, bottom line, I think as long as we're thinking outside the box. So are you going to mail newsletters or postcards? Do you want to advertise on a billboard? Have you guys seen agents advertise on a billboard yet? Social media, you talked about ads in a restaurant. I've seen ads on the end of your grocery cart before. I'm like, that's so smart. I love it. Door to door, old fashioned door to door. I do say this. If you're going to go door to door, first off at the entrance of the subdivision or the community, you make sure there's not a sign that says no soliciting. If they say no soliciting, then you can't solicit. If the home itself says no soliciting or no trespassing, they're saying they don't want you knocking on their door. So we still need to honor that. The other thing I have to say about door to door, you guys, is there's safety in numbers. So if you're going to go door to door knocking, take a buddy with you. You guys can walk the neighborhood. Maybe it's a neighborhood you think you're going to farm, so that'd be a great way for you to start introducing yourself to the people there. But yeah, your possibilities are endless. And again, you guys may be trying a whole bunch of things right now. And one thing that makes me very nervous about you guys is how fast I've seen new agents open up their wallet. They think it's a good opportunity for lead generation. And I'm not saying it's not, but just don't be so fast to whip out your wallet. Make sure you're doing your research before you start paying for a bunch of services and leads, especially as you're getting started. You guys feel like you're being nickel and dimed already anyway with post licensing and joining your board and all this other stuff. So just there's things you can do for less amount. Just start with that. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about the door knocking. So I tried that last week and it was awesome, by the way. But
Good.
with the solicitation, it's technically, is it still solicitation just to go knock on a door, just introduce yourself? But you're like in the neighborhood down the street, you just want to say, hey, get some contact information?
I would say yes, because you're trying to solicit that information. I would say, because they may not open the door and you may not say, hi, I'm a real estate agent, right? But isn't that where you're going? So I would just, pay attention to those signs in the neighborhood. And again, you guys, seriously, safety in numbers, right? Be creative, think outside the box. I got a teammate, he does flags every year for the 4th of July in his neighborhood. They're like 20 cents each, and they're like little wood poles, and it's a flag, and he tapes his business card to it somehow, and then he just goes around. All he does is just put in everybody's front yard. So first off, it's really cool when you're driving through the neighborhood because everybody's got their little flag out. But 2, when they walk out in their front yard, they go, who is this? And they see their friendly neighborhood realtor, and it's got him much business over the year. It's allowed him to meet a lot of his neighbors. Just do just that act. So there's lots of things you can do and try, and we're all different. So some things may work for you and some things may not, but sometimes it's just a matter of doing enough until you try and seeing what works for you, seeing what sticks. Questions? So I have a question for you guys. You guys got your chats up? Let's get your chats up. Make sure it's set just to me if that's an option. I need to look into that. But tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. So commission rates are set by, it looks like we're all good. The firm has a policy, but remember, commission is still negotiable between the firm and the seller. When we look at the listing agreement in a minute, in case I forget to say it then, when we take that listing agreement with us to the listing appointment, we can start filling in some of the blanks. We can start putting in the property information and something on your firm's policy. But that commission field should be blank so we can have that conversation with the seller. Again, how negotiable, how much wiggle room do you have? That's your firm's policy. So they'll let you know what kind of, what you got there. Let's see, let's do that again. A, B, C, or D. So do not call. Do we get everybody in? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Do not call governs everything except postal mail. We have no restrictions on, 50-50 shot. I know. You had a do not get a scratcher today. So you have so you don't have restrictions on that. Mail has gone down. So maybe having something in their hand, something that catches their eye, maybe something with a call to action. Because isn't it really easy to walk most mail straight to the recycling bin without ever, but at least if you can make them look at it on their way to the recycling bin, and as somebody, I think it was Ryan said earlier, it's all about consistency. So if you pick a neighborhood, if you send something to that neighborhood regularly, maybe that be monthly or quarterly or however you want to, eventually they're going to be like, who is this person and why do they keep sending me stuff? And you're going to get them to look at yours. So I'm not ruling it out. It's still a way to go. And right now we don't have regulations on it. So, mail what you want. Again, shop around your costs and everything, because it can add up, but there's services out there. My mom is, I love it, but she'll send, everybody in the church, everybody she used to work with, everybody my dad used to work, all the family, everybody gets a birthday card for my mom. That's like her thing. She's known as sending the birthday cards. And her reasoning being for that is, it's nice to walk out to your mailbox every once in a while and see something other than a bill. And I think when it comes to sending and mailing stuff and stuff like that, I think it's helpful. Again, it kind of stands out a little bit. So have a piece that makes them want to look at it. Like I said, give them a call to action, visit my website and vote, or, something like that. Yeah.
I got one thing to say about that. I just bought this property here beginning of November, and I've never seen so many real estate mailers as I have since I bought this property. Little did I know that I'm actually, I was studying to be, and now I am a broker. I still get flyers every single day about this property. I'm like, what the, I just bought it.
Yep. I bought my house 3 years ago and I still get flyers. Sometimes I'm getting ideas, right? So you got check it out, Michael. You might, they say the most sincerest form of flattery is, borrowing. Actually, I think they think stealing, but, back to those recruiting letters you guys got when you got your real estate license. I got those recruiting letters in the mail too, but what they didn't realize is at the time I was administrator working for the recruiting department of my firm. They were giving me fuel. I was like, look, guys, this is what I got the other day. So you never know who you're sending it to. But again, it's a numbers game, so.
Oddly enough, I've yet to receive, and this doesn't say anything, maybe it does, I don't know. I haven't done anything in the field, but I have not received anything from any brokerage trying to hire me.
Really? When you got your license?
Yeah,
maybe they're not doing that anymore. Maybe they don't do that in your market, but yeah, here, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Did you
that's
guys?
probably-
What about the
yeah,
rest
we
of you?
definitely did.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah?
getting them. I got one today.
Oh my God.
It's like
Michael,
when you
that
go
might be your
speed limit.
market. right? That just might not be how you guys do things down there. So, interesting.
You know, I love cow country. It's so simple and nobody really messes with you out here.
There you go. All right, let's see. Y'all ready for a break? Let's take 10. We'll come back. We're going to work more with sellers.
Sounds good.
All right. So this next, again, still working with sellers, and we're going to start talking about some pre-listing things. And I think the thing to understand going into this conversation is there is no standard order of doing things, right? There's no guarantee that you'll be able to do the listing appointment and then go back and measure. I mean, every seller's different, every situation's different. So when we have this conversation, again, we're not giving you an in order to do list. We're just giving you a general idea of things that we need to at some point do, making sure that we're best getting ready for this listing. So for example, what I mean by all this is it starts with talking about some pre-listing activities. When you are, as the listing agent, and you are preparing for your listing appointment, maybe it's a competitive listing, in which case you have to go sell yourself, right? You have to go prove why you would stand out, why you would do better than other agents. Maybe you know you have the listing. Maybe it's somebody from your center and they say, we want to hire you, come over tomorrow night, right? So as we say, there is no standard, there is no absolute must do it this way. But as the listing agent in any situation, what do you guys think are some documents that we need to prepare to get ready for our listing appointment? What do you guys think are some documents we need to get ready?
Deed information.
Maybe some deed information, start learning about the home. That's
Square
something we can
footage.
gather. Yeah, what was that?
Square footage. Yeah.
CMA and sort of have an idea of what the other homes are going for, so we can get a good price for it.
Start doing a CMA so we can, have that conversation. Because at some point that listing appointment, the seller's going to ask, what do you think my home can sell for? What do you think the probable sales price? What's the one we've talked about? You want to make sure you take with you if you haven't done it already?
Working with agent.
Yep. Having that document ready with you, like on top as soon as you walk in the door, right? If you haven't done that already. Some
But I'll
things
look-
that, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I look at the history of the house, prior sales.
You go in MLS, you learn about the history. I love that. You can see old pictures a lot of times. And while that may not tell you the condition of the property today, you can see what it used to look like. And maybe if you notice, like, I don't know, maybe there used to be a wall there and now it's not. Now there's not. Can't we start asking questions about permits and, that kind of thing with the renovation? So absolutely studying the history of the house. I think any good listing agent, no matter what document we're looking at, whenever you're getting ready for the listing appointment, to Fred and Michael's point, we need to learn as much about the property as we possibly can. Ideally, by the time we get to that listing appointment, we should know just about everything about the property except for what it currently looks like inside. So we go in with an idea, and even though we can study the history, as Fred said, we still don't know what it looks like today. But doing our research, and again, you guys, you may or may not be on a competitive listing appointment. The seller may or may not tell you that they're talking to other agents. If I were you, I would go into every single listing appointment assuming that it's competitive. And if I were you, I would take your A game every single time. Not unless this is like mom and dad where you better get the listing, So I would treat all of them as they were competitive so you're prepared. I mean, could you imagine, let's say you and I are going on a competitive listing appointment. You and I are competing. And you're sitting there with the seller and you can tell the seller what their deed says, what the zoning is. the school boards, and what NCDOT says. You can tell the seller what they paid in taxes this year. You know all this information. And then I show up for my listing appointment and I'm like, what are your taxes? What's your school district? And I know nothing. Who's going to get the job? Obviously you are, right? Because you did your research and you look much more knowledgeable to the seller. So again, understanding what makes this conversation hard is there is no normal listing appointment. They're all a little bit different. Again, we're not telling you this is the exact order that you have to do it, but just trying to give you a guide. So as we're getting ready for this listing appointment, in addition to the stuff you guys said, we're going to want to get, there's our working with real estate agent disclosure, have that ready to go. Any listing appointment I ever go on, I always take my listing agreement with me. Because if the seller says, I want to hire you, I don't want to say, oh, I'll send you the paperwork tomorrow. If they say, I want to hire, boom, we're ready to go. We can do this right now. Our seller disclosures. We're going to talk about the RPOs and the MOG. Lead-based paint, if the home was built prior to 1978. Your property data sheet. Your MLS input sheet would be another way to say that. I'm old school. I will take my MLS input sheet on the listing appointment or when I know I have the listing and go through the home and check things off. You guys may not experience this yet, but I'm telling you, after you've been in it a while, after you've seen enough homes, they all start to run together after a while. And you get home and you think you have the information. You're like, now does that home have a ceiling fan? Or you with me? It kind of just starts all blurring together. So having that property data sheet, you can stand there in the home and say, oh yeah, there's a ceiling fan. Oh yeah, it has a fireplace. Oh yeah, here are the features of the home, because you're standing there gathering the information. And then we want to also make sure we get a sample sales contract to the seller. You know, we want to have the seller try to look over this before the offer comes in, because guys, let's face it, when a seller gets an offer, they only care generally about two things: how much and when do they want to close. And we know our offer to purchase and contract, our standard offer to purchase and contract is like 16 pages. There's a lot more involved than how much and when, right? So by getting them a sample sales contract, by having this conversation about stuff like due diligence, you know, seller says, really, I get money? Yeah, you get money too. So having this conversation, putting that in their hand and encouraging them to look over it, so they're just aware of some of these provisions when the offer comes in. Again, CMA, property information through your realist, your RIS or GIS page, all that, absolutely. We're trying to learn as much about the properties we possibly can before we ever get there. What are some things that we can ask the seller to gather for us? What are some docs that we can ask the seller to get together?
If they have a current mortgage, what the loan is, and so on and so forth, what's the balance remaining?
Outstanding mortgage or mortgages, outstanding liens, try to get approximate balances. What else can the seller help us out with? That's a big one. For
Copy of the driver's license.
The seller?
Yeah.
Sure.
I guess all the utilities in the area that buyers will be using.
There you go. We have it. My team uses a utility sheet. So I like to make my listings easy to sell. So when you look in our listing in MLS is one of the attachment, it has a utility sheet. So it tells you, you know, Duke, city, da 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 da. It tells the buyer where they can get all their hookups.
I've been on the buyer side so much that I've found so many issues in houses that I bought. I'm gonna stick with the buyer side. As I'm more like a building inspector. I can't be on the seller side, so I don't know what the heck.
Michael's going to work with buyers. Got it.
I mean, I'll sit there. I did a walkthrough with the other company a few weeks back, and it was a 1905 Victorian. But I found cracks in the walls and everything else, and I'm pointing them out to the potential seller. Needless to say, I didn't get the sale. I found every problem, broken the windows and everything else, and I'm like, nope. I'm looking at it like a building inspector.
Yeah, they didn't like that, did they? So, but your buyers will love it. So, again, just to give us a general idea, we may, obviously we can find the seller's deed online. We can go to the register of deeds and look it up ourselves, but it may not be a bad idea to ask the seller for a copy of their deed. Make sure the two match. Make sure that what you have is the current, what you found is the current. If the sellers ever had a survey done, maybe they had a survey when they bought the home, or maybe they had a survey during the time they own the home. Not so much to share with buyers, but more so to help us determine the size of the lot, easements, that kind of thing. Some sellers, and I think your book even says it somewhere, and it actually made me laugh out loud. But the book says that some sellers will share their survey with potential buyers. I've never in my years had a seller willing to share their survey. But what the manual tells us, the real estate manual tells us, is that even if the seller is willing to share their survey to buyers, buyers should still be encouraged to have their own survey done. Because first off, we don't know how long ago the sellers were surveyed, and if their monuments have moved over time, then we may not be able to identify those property lines. So just the buyer in their best interest should have the survey done. If the property's in an HOA, the seller can help us gather the HOA docs, the bylaws, the covenants, the restrictions, the articles of incorporation. Guys, a good buyer's agent is going to ask for the HOA docs. So why not have the seller start gathering the stuff, getting it together so we can have that ready. And then, as Michael said, their balance due. We're going to look at our listing agreement in just a minute, and we're going to see that it says what your approximate outstanding balance or balance is. So go ahead and start gathering that information now. So what I want to do now is get out of this. We're going to spend just a little bit of time, not a whole lot, but a little bit of time looking at our listing agreement. Not just any listing agreement, but particularly our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. This is not the only listing agreement we have available from NCAR, but it is probably the most commonly used one. The exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Remember, I cannot perform a single service for an owner without first having my written agency agreement. So as soon as they say, you're it, we're going to hire you, we need to have this thing ready to go so we can get it signed by everybody, and we can start doing our duties as a listing agent. Several of our forms, including this one, has guidelines to complete. So if you're ever stuck on what goes in a blank in the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, you can refer back to the guidelines. You have access to those when all your forms, when you have affiliated with your firm. The listing agreement is between the seller and who? The
Brokerage.
Or
the firm. So the listing agreement is entered into between the seller and the firm. Individual who signs this on behalf of the firm, the listing agent, is primarily responsible for ensuring that the firm's duties are fulfilled. It's understood and agreed that other agents of the firm may be assigned to fulfill such duties if deemed appropriate. The firm may require shall be deemed to include the individual agent who signs and any agents of the firm. So that's just letting the seller know that the relationship is with the firm. It's a firm. Mostly you're going to be communicating with the listing agent, but you may have an opportunity to communicate with others. One of my big things I did when I got into sales, I went up to the top producers in my office, I marched right up to them and I looked them straight in the eyeball and I said, I love doing open houses. You know what top producers don't like to do? Open houses. And when they heard me say that, and guys, I'm telling you, my first couple buyers came from open houses. So that was a big thing that helped me get started. If you guys are still, Teresa, taking notes on ways to, to meet buyers, you know, that might be something to consider. I wasn't the listing agent, but I was still an agent of the firm. So the seller's understanding that even though I wasn't their agent, I was still an agent of the firm, and I owed them those same duties, that same confidentiality as the listing agent does or did. Here's a blue note. A lot of our forms now come with either blue notes or red warnings. They're there to draw our attention, to capture our eye. They are not there to gloss over and say, oh yeah, that's not anything important. So our first blue note goes over a couple of situations. If the property was now recently owned by a person who's deceased, for example, bottom line of this, we should be advised to talk to an attorney. If the owner of the property is a corporation, LLC, trust, or other legal entity, the entity should be named as the seller. You should have one person that can sign this agreement on behalf of the entity. And then if you're dealing with a non-owner spouse, they should be named as the seller because they're going to be required to sign the deed. So if you have a spouse, it's not on the deed, we need to get the spouse on board. Remember, North Carolina is a spousal state. Takes one to buy, but we need both to sell. So if they're not on the deed, we need to make sure we include, or not on the deed, we need to make sure we include them, have them on board from day one. Seller represents, as of the effective date, they are not a party to a listing agreement with another firm. Seller also represents they received a copy of the working with real estate agent disclosure. And then we have the term of the agreement. Remember, one of the musts in our written agency agreement says that we have a definite end date. So we're told here that the term shall begin on the effective date. The effective date's the last date is signed, and shall end at 11:59 p.m. on its expiration date. That's pretty specific, right? So then we pick a date. And when does it end? The definite termination date is 11:59 on that date. We do have the option here if the property is currently listed. Seller represents that the current listing agreement expires on this date. So again, they've reached out to you and said, I'm not happy with my agent. We're just acknowledging that I can't do anything until this agreement expires. Then we have the property, street address, city, county, zip. These are North Carolina forms for North Carolina properties, so we don't even have to fill that in. They take care of that for us. By the way, just to point out a few things, our standard NCAR forms have our Realtor logo. If you're not a member, if you're not a Realtor, you can't use the forms. We're reminded that our forms come from NCAR. We have our Equal Housing Opportunity logo. And then we also have the form number and the revision. Make sure you're using the most current form. When in doubt, go to NCAR. You guys know you can log on to NCAR once you're a member. You can log on to NCAR and you can have access to all the forms there as well. So check with your BIC, but always make sure you're using the current. I'll tell you guys, in this electronic world that we're in today, this isn't as big of a problem as what it was 15 years ago when we all used paper. Because what happens 15 years ago was agents would make 20 copies of these and then carrying around in their trunk, and then the form would update. They never clean their trunk out. So then they'd have old forms and older forms and older forms, and they didn't know which was which. So thank you, technology, for helping to eliminate that. Still talking about the property, we got a place here for the legal description. As much information as we can Again, a lot of this information we can find on our GIS, our county's GS. We also see very similar verbiage in our offer to purchase and contract. So we know eventually we're going to need this information anyway. So we're just getting with the seller to make sure that we have it. And then we have a conversation about fixtures and exclusions. Here's our big red warning. Parties should not assume that an item will or will not be included in the sale. Buyer and seller should be specific when negotiating what items are included or excluded. With fixtures, fixtures are included in the purchase price. All existing fixtures are included in the sale as part of the purchase price, free of liens unless excluded below. And then it gives us specifics for fixtures. And it tells us, and obviously this is new too, a sign of the times. All items listed below include both traditional and smart versions and any exclusively dedicated related equipment or remote control devices. So like, for example, talking about a fixture versus personal property, I would call the garage door clicker about as personal property as that gets, right? That thing can fit in your pocket pretty easily. However, does the garage door opener without the clicker? So because it's needed, it would be a device that would need to stay because it goes with the garage door. And then we have the list of fixtures. If you're using standard form 2T, these are the things that are considered fixtures. If you're using a different sales contract, you might see a different list. At the listing appointment or very early in your relationship, you need to have a conversation with the seller. And you need to tell the seller, I need you to look at this list. And if you're going to plan on taking anything with you, we need to have a conversation about it right now. I've had sellers, oh, okay, we'll look at it tonight before we can go to bed. And I say, you know what? I'm a really patient person. I can sit here for 4 minutes while you look at this. And I sit and oh, well, we want to take this. Oh, well, we want to take that. See, this is why I want to have this conversation. Guys, in a perfect world, the seller will take down the fixture and replace it with something comparable, something compatible to that space. A buyer will never see it or never show up in our pictures. The buyer will never know that it was there. Do we live in a perfect world? No, we don't. That's ideal. I get that that's ideal. Seller, well, that's my grandmother's antique chandelier. Can I take it with? Well, of course you can take it with you. It's grandma's antique chandelier. Can you take it down before I open it up for showings? Can you take it down before I take pictures? And if you do, go out to Lowe's, get you another chandelier that looks nice in that dining room. What if the seller says, nope, I've never not eaten a meal under grandma's antique chandelier, and I'm not going to start now. I'm not taking that thing down until I move. All right. It becomes my job as the listing agent to make sure that every single buyer that buys that looks at that home know that when they buy this house, when they show up on moving day, that chandelier is not going to be there. We need to let everybody know that that's an exclusion and what the seller's plans are. Are they still going to get you something? Does the buyer have an input? Please don't leave me a light bulb on a string in the dining room. Let's put something up there that looks nice. So again, we just have to have the conversation. I need to let all potential buyers know it's not going to stay. I need to make sure that it's excluded in the offer to purchase and contract. I need to make sure that we're all on board. Unpairing or deleting data from devices, again, a sign of the times. Our homes are getting really smart, aren't they? And some of our homes are a lot smarter than us. I'm hearing about, and we just keep going. Technology isn't going to stop anytime soon. So our homes are going to get smarter and smarter. And they've recently had to put verbiage in, it's in our contract too, that says if anything is going to stay, the seller needs to unpair those devices and set things back to factory reset, factory default settings. It also says the seller's obligations under this paragraph survive closing. So if the seller moves out and forgets to on-pair the Ring doorbell, for example, they still have an obligation to on-pair that and set it back to the factory setting. I had the pleasure of taking a class last year. It was a forms class, and it was from a lady that is on the forms committee at NCAR. So that's who I want to go to lunch with right there. I'm sure she's got some stories. And she told us the reason they had to add this, y'all, when this stuff gets added to the contract, it's not just to make our lives difficult or to watch these go up to 13, 14, 15, 16 pages. These things are added for a reason. And there were cases where buyers and sellers got to the end and they got petty, and the buyer bought and they were sitting in their new home and the seller still had access to things on their phone. So they were driving down the street in the middle of the night, turning lights on and off and opening the garage door and doing all sorts of things because they didn't unpair, they didn't disconnect. Does this surprise you? So how did the forms committee fix this? They included this verbiage: listing agents, we need to have a conversation with sellers to unpair their smart devices before they move out. Items leased or not owned, anything such as antennas, satellite dishes, receivers, alarm equipment, security equipment, anything like that, that could be excluded. I mean, if the seller can't sell it if it's not theirs, right? So if it's leased or not owned, then that's going to be excluded. And then any items that do not convey. So if there's any fixtures that weren't removed before you listed, any fixtures that weren't removed before you took those pictures, then we need to make sure that they're excluded here. And again, listing agents, this is where well, in the contract, obviously, specifically in the contract, we need to make sure that grandma's antique chandelier is excluded, so the buyers know when they buy, they're not getting that. There's also verbiage again in our contract. Seller shall repair any damage caused by the removal of any items excluded above. So they can't jerk the chandelier out of the ceiling and leave a big hole. They need to at least repair it. The opposite of fixtures, personal property. What personal property is the seller going to leave? Hands down, the number one personal property item is the refrigerator. I would have conversations with your sellers. What are you willing to leave? If they want the fridge, are you willing? The washer dryer, what are you willing? Just because the seller's willing to leave it, there's no guarantee that the buyer wants it. Maybe the buyer has a nicer fridge than what's there. Maybe the buyer has an attachment, sentimental attachment to their washer and dryer, and they want their own. They don't want yours. So I think it's worth discussing with the seller what happens if they don't. It's got to be asked for in the contract. It's not automatic. I had a seller once, I want to leave the fridge. I said, great. Offer came in. Fridge was not part of personal property. I called the listing agent and I said, he's willing to leave the fridge. And she said, my guys have their own refrigerator. I said, great. So I called my seller, said, you got to do something with it. They don't want it. You can't leave it. To them, it's trash. You got to do something with it. Comments on fixtures, personal property.